This is chaos. This is bedlam. There's some things you need to know about Monster Hunter. It's enormous worldwide today, but before the global fame, it was on par with Dragon Quest for popularity in Japan. It's the kind of game you call in sick for. Monster Hunter is so important, it's featured in Smash Bros. Monster Hunter is so important, you can play a generic hunter in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Just a conceptual hunter. Monster Hunter is so important you can fight a Rathalos, the same guy from the Smash crossover, in Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. Monster Hunter is video games. And yet, you've either played it a whole awful lot or like, not at all. I like Monster Hunter a little bit. This franchise is a journey. I hiked my way up stony cliffs and trudged through rainy bogs. I've been to breezy shores and descended magma-carved crevices. I have been to hell and back for this series. If you've never played them, you probably don't get that, but it's fine. Take a seat at the campfire anyway, and I'll tell you how it all went down. Monster Hunter tells you what it is up front. You kill monsters. What that title doesn't convey is how much charm, detail, and consideration pervades even the earliest entries. Despite its endlessly iterative releases, Monster Hunter is a series that convincingly renders the natural world in so many polygons. It's a feat that's hardly matched by any other series, because few ever dare to cast the player as just another animal. It's rare to play a video game where the monsters are earnestly bigger threats than the player. Don't just roll over to dodge spam or die in a combo string. And beyond the gameplay, it's warm and heartfelt and funny in ways you wouldn't expect going off box art. It's something you have to play to really feel, otherwise it's all just memes, screams, and content, merchandise, and 1,000 ad campaigns. Playing Monster Hunter, get big bone! So yeah, Monster Hunter is real cool dude business, but it takes a while to click. Oh no. This is not a comprehensive look at the entire Monster Hunter series. This is a sane and feasible project backed by patrons that looks over the 5 generations of Monster Hunter. It's my journey, that's all. I didn't roll into this project planning to be comprehensive. You can't. You can try. Someone out there will, one day, maybe. A ghost perhaps, and attempt to explain game by game the lineage of Monster Hunter with every entry present. But most of what Monster Hunter is doesn't need a 10-hour explanation. Barely needs one, but there's history worth exploring as well. Currently, Monster Hunter can be divided into 5 generations, each centered around a landmark game and what it established. Things will stop by on this very long path. Playing Monster Hunter consecutively, you find content is reused, repurposed, or remade generation over generation, so regardless, to explain the core of Monster Hunter is to explain all of Monster Hunter. Grunk Swing Club Kill Raptor. It's 2.5 hours of this! It's a gameplay-first franchise, selling a type of play that's familiar at a glance, but completely alien to actually pick up. Like it was made for someone with 3 hands, like Dark Souls and Armored Core. It's not your average action game. And how would you know? The box arts do almost nothing to convey the actual charm of the setting or its idiosyncrasies. It's always big ugly monster, usually high contrast, menacing, and scaly. The kinds of things that evoke bad action game or generico hack and slash on a store shelf. And they're really nothing like that. Not that the games are lying about what they are. Hulking dinosaur making my life hell? Yeah, that's Monster Hunter! But you'd figure they'd lead with the cutesy stuff. I mean, this is a game with a sentient race of bipedal cats. In like every game. They cook for you, bro! Sometimes they're even ethnic caricatures! Actually, this is a Capcom game, what am I saying? It's a game where, in spite of all the giant lizard hunting, an old guy in a forest will give you items for free, where a guy who looks like a catfish lays you out in arm wrestling. A game where an old granny forges weapons. That's my line! That's like my catchphrase, she stole it! And that's the thing about Monster Hunter. What looks like a slow-moving content factory action title from 10 paces slowly reveals itself over generations. Its charm, humor, soul, all hidden under a slick veneer, appealing to gamers with exactly what you'd expect. I can be a badass hunter! I can be #1! I can cart 9 times to Anjanath! I hate this game! I hate Monster Hunter! This rare specimen is the North American YouTuber. He is well versed in disappointing everyone, everywhere, all at once. He rises no earlier than 10 a.m. Rises may be overly charitable in this case. In time, he may get his life together, but for now, it's the small things that ease the daily burdens. Monster Hunter, a game for the ill. Most Monster Hunter folks won't recommend the original game, and I'm torn on the issue. Games made for sickos. Not like, liking SMT surely qualifies as a personality. Not like, it's a unique combination of item stockpiling, mission repeating, mechanics interrogating, and narrative appreciating sickos. And you can't just be one and get a pass. You gotta collect them all. Like diseases, to meaningfully put yourself in the mental mindset. Okay, for the original Monster Hunter. I'm not in the business of good game, bad game anymore. I think it's a stupid conversation. Regardless, Monster Hunter is utterly brilliant and blindingly frustrating. They truly don't make them like this anymore, and that makes the experience rare. And you know I like them juicy. On the other hand, people jump down this game's throat for things I don't get. It's always, controls this, controls that. Analog stick attacks killed my mom. But that's nonsense. She could have dodged easily. You see the frames on that swing? It's everything else, really. The wonky camera controls and the inability to lock onto enormous monsters that tromp all over the screen faster than you can reposition. It's truly deranged hitboxes, making attacks that, in modern Monster Hunter games, you never sweat over. Actively lethal.
Okay, clip that! Did you see? The box was so big! It went behind the shield!
It's having to perform to a higher standard than most action games and work within incredibly short windows on limited information. In solo play, sometimes you genuinely need to perfectly dodge something you can't reposition fast enough to visually confirm. It's the total lack of quality of life features and having to fight for every last step forward on the winding mountain path to completion. Monster Hunter will kick your ass up and down the plateau, and even laugh about it. It's a hard sell. Not all art is appreciated in its time, yeah. I mean, no way I'm paying for that exhibit either. I struggle with the game, and never properly beat the thing. I got near the end, took a look around, and left. If you meet someone who beat Monster Hunter PS2, run. But I think it's a worthy conversation piece and has unique value for kicking off the franchise, for how it runs counter to common dev wisdom and exists in defiance of the audience, purely to its artistic benefit. Monster Hunter is a special kind of hell, the kind of game you don't see coming, and you're there, lying on the floor, wondering how it happened, kneecaps shattered, arms limp, torn from their sockets. Damn you video games. Damn you to hell! You can sum up Monster Hunter in a handful of phrases. Enter a zone, kill monsters, collect items, craft things, and repeat. It's an incredibly simple game, told in text, but that simplicity belies how completely uncooperative the game is, how the gameplay is lubricated with sandpaper. If Monster Hunter were a fleshlight, you'd be getting degloved. You're given a few tutorial missions early on, and they break you in just fine, get you going through the motions. You load into your campsite, you raid the supply box for survival items, the minimap pops up because that particular utility is affixed to a guaranteed but critically optional pickup, and walk into the world. The music soars, you gaze out at that glorious early PS2 wilderness, and the instruments fade. Good luck, dumbass. The tutorial missions aren't challenging. Collecting herbs and mushrooms is just a matter of rifling through the local flora, and the early fauna mostly roars and rolls over. You cook some steak and take in the moment before heading out into the forest. Monster Hunter is deceptive in its first hour and so smart. Tell someone they're pretty before beating their ass at chess. These are the lessons. You're made to learn basic things that are boring to actually perform. Digging around for herbs isn't particularly exciting, but these tasks are core to the experience, because you need approximately 5,000 potions, and that's one herb per. Monster Hunter, the first game to be specific, is one of the most thoroughly considered examples of ecology demonstrated in a video game. Its narrative design is brilliant. I love it. It's probably the only thing I love about the game at all. You start your career without real armor, a crappy makeshift sword and shield. Before you ever dig into a monster, you know, what the game is named after, you're stuck in a cordoned off entry level doing what humans have done since they first drew breath. You forage, you gather, and when you draw your weapon, it's to feed yourself, not to make armor. You're not even given the privilege of acquiring proper gear right away because you must first realize your place in this world. You are not a legend, an action game hero, whatever. You're another animal, no better than anything else in these woods, and you feel it palpably when you first encounter the lowly Velociprey, the first real small monster. You get a cutscene. The game highlights how dangerous they can be, and to the game's credit, they are. Between minimal armor, controls that need wrangling, and low health, you can be killed by just about any monster if you're not paying attention. And unlike the raptors, you're alone. The guild thinks you've got some potential, but you've got to earn your place by physically surviving, overcoming, and climbing through the food chain. Near the end of the tutorial quests, you encounter a Rathalos, the big guy on the box, the Monster Hunter monster, and you don't get to fight. I mean, you can die if you want to, but you're told to just run, leave the area, because you're not ready yet. You're made to find and ferry a wyvern egg all the way to the campsite, and it's one of Monster Hunter's most notorious experiences for a reason. Any bump, bad jump, even running out of stamina will drop the egg, which by the way makes me apoplectic.
Oh my god. This game!
Daring to rob these monsters of their offspring for your own benefit is a Herculean task that shunts plenty of players within minutes. You have to become a master of movement, weaving between scores of chittering freaks watching your stamina the entire time. It's harrowing. It's infuriating. And all of these early experiences amount to a solidly established tone. You can go gather, that's fine, but don't expect to take on the wilderness without some serious fun work. You are not Dante, you are not Ryu Hayabusa. Actually, I think you're more like the level 1 guy from those ads. You know the ones. You're even denied the basic materials to upgrade your gear. Modern-day Monster Hunter looks a little different. Ore deposits are clearly marked, sometimes glowing. You don't even need to equip your pickaxes. In the original title, though, you're made to find ore deposits, cracks in the walls of caverns or on the sides of mountains, navigate your equipped items, and select the pickaxe before taking anything home. And even then, pickaxes broke in wildly varying numbers of hits, sometimes after a few strikes. And you aren't actually able to mine iron ore or earth crystals in any meaningful amount without incredible luck until later missions where the drop rate is adjusted. If you're stuck on any given monster fight, it's possible you won't be allowed to grind up gear, or if you do, it'll take an impressive number of reruns of the very few already completable quests available to the player. Quests are categorized into hunter ranks. You're made to clear a number, and typically not all of any given rank's quests before you're handed an urgent quest that tests the player's strength. It's a smart system. No point in throwing players into the upper echelons if they can't handle whatever teaser monster leads into the next tier. It also lets players know naturally when the time to start farming and gathering is, provided they're not keeping up. Early game gear doesn't warp the game completely, but every advantage is necessary when you're playing alone in these older games. You can get away with a whole lot more in the side games and later titles, generally speaking, but it's always relevant to progress. Not every hunt is a kill quest. Sometimes you're directly asked to capture a monster, which is performed the same way in every generation. Slap the thing until it limps away, set a shock trap, and ping it with a couple sleep bombs. These items are provided by the game during any particular capture mission. The stuff can be hard to come by, and the game isn't super forthcoming with crafting recipes, expecting players to talk amongst each other to figure things out. Yeah, sounds fun as in 2005 North America. Yeah, I'll trade this in for one copy of Neopets and the Darkest Fairy, please. Current Monster Hunter wants players running as many missions as possible. Old Monster Hunter doesn't care what you do, and there's not much to pick from. Have fun. Or something. Whatever. It's worth noting that Monster Hunter was originally conceived of as a fantasy series, like old D&D style fantasy, like Tower of Doom and Dragon's Crown fantasy. What is it with Japanese game devs and red dragons, man? The original version had a magic system. I'm struggling to even imagine it on these controls. It's even got the series' very own red dragon, the Rathalos, right on the box. But the traces of its fantastical origins are scant, buried under blades of grass. It's a series that ended up how it is today because the devs had an idea, sat down, and interrogated it. The various Monster Hunter art books actually give out more information than any of the dev interviews do. Fujioka explicitly states that, quote, "We had it in our heads that this was going to be a fantasy game, so our ideas tended to gear towards magic and the like. The world as a whole was much more fantastical as well. I doubt any of us expected it to turn out so analog." He goes on to explain that the games weren't really founded on a firm concept right away, and you see that throughout the entire series of generations, right? Just how the games become more stylized, how they become more dynamic visually. High fantasy translates well to games. Spells can be devastating, armor can shine and weigh 20 tons, and the avatar can always carry it. Monster designs can be pilfered from a vast, sweeping territory long since charted, but fully tinkerable if you let your mind run wild. It's a fertile ground for simple story creation, MacGuffins, obvious evils, and armed allies. But Monster Hunter needed to be what you see today, a game about struggling against enormous monsters, carving their bodies for parts, and crafting new gear with the spoils. And frankly, that doesn't sound very high fantasy. That's more like sociopathy or like ascended caveman business. Imagine stapling a cheetah pelt to an iron bar. Drugs swing faster now. Man, what the f is wrong with you? So the chosen aesthetic adapts those early concepts into something unique. If the series took a more generic approach, it's hard to say it'd be as well recognized today. Monster Hunter had the balls to make the mundane fantastical, elevating its splashes of color through sheer aesthetic subtraction. And it works. Eventually, you graduate from the first area and get the option to stake a claim in the desert. Oh boy! It's a powerful shift. The game was hard before, but now it's outright frustrating. The heat saps your life unless you come stocked with cool drinks, a consumable that remains a series staple for most of its lifespan, a consumable to greenlight basic gameplay. The monsters can be infuriating too. Sand-diving land sharks that are hard to catch and tough to kill. It's a hostile environment, and you need to demonstrate understanding of the game's systems to conquer it. Even a willingness to engage. You cannot play Monster Hunter just kind of like whatever, okay? You have to try! Making cool drinks is plausible, but requires obnoxious farming to actually stockpile, and so you buy them. Alongside your rapidly destroyed pickaxes, you try desperately to upgrade your gear to match the zone, and find yourself sacrificing healing items, the ability to mine at all, just to progress, which naturally halts your progress until you make enough money to earn the right to mine again. It's an extremely strapped economy, played straight, and in truth, you're not supposed to progress rapidly. You're meant to be minding your bank account, legitimately strategizing your resources because, again, you are not a hero. You're a big dumb animal. Nice weapon upgrade. Enjoy the week of ice soup, moron. Oh, good. Exactly what I love to see. I remember an interview for Steambot Chronicles where the director was surprised. The players ran through the 20-ish hour game in a few days. He thought it would take at least a month, which is crazy because it's nowhere near that hard and really fun. Come on, man, game good. Monster Hunter, by comparison, should take a month to play at the bare minimum because the amount of repetition demands breaks. You can only run the same handful of missions so many times before your brain is reduced to a fine fibrous paste. Eventually you encounter the Cephadrome, a monster that buries itself underground and rarely surfaces, at least in this first game. He comes out voluntarily, though much more often in the later games, but for now, he's being kind of an asshole. The game expects you to draw him out of the sand with sonic bombs after reading up on him, or taking a hint via the 2 sonic bombs you're handed at the start of the hunt. It takes significantly more bombs to get enough hits in to kill the thing. It doesn't tell you the recipe right away. Let's get some help online. This is annoying. The Cephadrome. An easy beast, if you know what to do. First, start making sonic bombs. Combine gunpowder with screamers to make one. Note, gunpowder is nitro shroom plus fire herb. Screamer is finish the Elder's Geodrome urgent quest. You should have about 10 before you head out. Buy a pair of cool drinks. Get a slicing weapon. That's right, new player. Go farm 2 items to make 1 material. With a chance of failure, by the way, combining isn't guaranteed. And 2 more items to make another material, and combine those 2 items in the handy and not nearly tutorialized enough combine menu to make enough bombs to hunt the monster at all. This is like the 3rd big monster, and you're making me juggle consumables. Game, please! Items in Monster Hunter are hard to talk about. On one hand, you absolutely need a handful of items to play the game at all. Whetstones are necessary to allow your weapons to hit monsters. Anything less than your sharpest risks wasted time and effort. Curatives are mandatory because few players under the top percentile are scraping by unscathed in a 20 to 40 minute session. Can I finish a League of Legends game without getting hit? Yeah, not likely. Rations are the bedrock of the entire game. Your stamina withers over the course of a hunt because people need food. Without stamina, the game is miserable. Without food, life is miserable. Sure, cool. But then you get into psycho serums and energy drinks and healing powders and barrel bombs. Things that let you ignore fundamental rules of play, like buffing yourself into a state of unflinchability, infinite stamina for spammy dual blades users, healing your allies in multiplayer simulating a healer's job in a party RPG, and bombs are just guaranteed damage if they go off and help set up enormous slam dunks on sleeping monsters. It's a game that's far richer if you take the time to engage, learn combinations, properly gather, and don't just rush to the end, like a big dumb YouTuber would. But there's a lot of time and effort that goes into any kind of proper appreciation with a game this textured, and brother, I was chafing by the end. Just don't walk into Monster Hunter thinking you're going to be playing a fighting game. Even if it taps into some of those fundamentals, you need to become one with the land and the job to inhabit the role of the Monster Hunter. If you're struggling with the Cephadrome, which you are, shut up. Just shut up, expert and new era players, you don't get it. You're also free to tackle Yankut-ku, one of the most frequently seen monsters in the series, arguably the first real monster of the game. It's set in a new zone, the jungle, which is suitably damp and misty, visually obscured at times from all the foliage, and buddy, Yankut-ku is counting on it. You're treated to a violent scramble against an unpredictable, fire-spitting, screen-tromping bird lizard. It sucks. It sucks so bad. At one point I went online and received the best advice a new player could from a random forum post. Always act as though the monster will do the worst possible move wherever you are. They're so right it hurts. That's the kind of post that knows loss. And if you're a newer era player, let me tell you, Yankut-ku gets a whole lot easier. Don't you worry, I made sure to get my pound of flesh. I'm just screaming my pain into the internet in the hopes someone can heal me. Please heal me! I realized very quickly that Monster Hunter was not the fun nature adventuring game I imagined it was. Monster Hunter, I realized, is a demento game made for twisted, profoundly unemployed people, because who else had time for this? People who really like monsters, like Catherine the Great, really liked horses, and worse, I should have known to watch my back. I played all of Dark Souls, man. I've played online fighters. Of course Yankut-ku would tailspin 4 times in a row, mixing me up and laying me out. Obviously he would do that. I'm not angry. I'm not upset. This is a personal gripe, aka a skill issue. But I think the Sword and Shield is actually pretty terrible to teach a new player Monster Hunter 1 specifically. It's great in later games, just does its thing. Slap down damage, roll away, guard what you can't, whatever. In the first game though, before you really understand how you're meant to actually hunt monsters, before you break into the mold of Monster Hunter, it's kind of like picking a more complex character in a fighting game that won't teach you the fundamentals. And that's simply because the weapon is made for the player to chain attacks into each other, get aggressive. But Monster Hunter is broadly a passive system. If you pick a bigger, heavier weapon, for example, you'll learn very quickly. You get to hit, dodge, and pull out, and that's how you consistently and safely take things down. Sword and Shield doesn't have that immediate wall. It's also kind of like bringing a knife to a gunfight. Every other weapon, minus a bonus inclusion in the Western release, has bigger hitboxes. Greatswords, lances, hammers, all of them swing higher than the piddly sword and shield and tack on more damage to boot, admittedly matching for relative speed, but the sword and shield won't teach you to play the first game well. You can use bowguns too, but the last thing a new player wants walking into this is to spend their precious money on a risky new playstyle that demands a whole second set of armor and ammo to even fire. Cruft overload, bro. I tried almost everything and settled on the lance. This, I told myself, would give me superior guarding ability and boss stunlock potential. The internet says this will work for me. Let's go! No, I put my few leftover resources into this thing. No! It's a textured type of game, aiming for an almost survivalist vibe, so weapons deteriorate fairly quickly, but become more tempered with upgrades. My pathetic bone lance became flaccid, smooth, all in a couple of jabs, rendering it unreliable and liable to bounce off a monster's flesh unless I sharpened it. Sharpening takes a good few uninterrupted seconds, in a game that pits you against droves of shrieking raptors. The best course of action is leaving any of the delineated zones to sharpen where you're free from immediate monster harassment. This requires a loading screen. You can see how players fall off. Somewhere along the journey I wandered into the swamp. My favorite part of Monster Hunter is the environments. They're just neat to look at, explore, you know? It's something you're actually forced to do early. The game doesn't tell you where valuable collection points are. They aren't marked on a map. You're made to tap the A button across every zone to learn. You get a better sense with time, sure, but sometimes things are hidden in grass and otherwise obscured. You're really made to root around in these spaces, which is a good design choice when the environment is the real draw and physical world interaction is pretty minimalistic. It makes you a real hunter, but also another part of the ecosystem. Again, another animal. Monster Hunter is at its best when its art shines through. Unfortunately, you fight the Gypseros in this zone, which sucks because I think it's trash garbage now. The monster that properly filtered me was this gnarly thing. It poisons you. If you don't drink an antidote, you're going down. Newer age Monster Hunter fans just don't know. They do not know the struggle. It shares most of its moves with the young Cuckoo. It was an experimental title, so plenty of its own content is reskinned. The dragons of MH1 are mostly just increasingly powerful young Cuckoo, and you'd think that'd make it easy. It's only a little harder, right? The problem is, it moves so fast and does so much damage and carries so much risk of poisoning the player that you need to bring your best or go home in a body bag. It makes the player a joke. The cherry on top is the nose horn that flashbangs you. You cannot turn away to physically avoid the flash. This is the kind of shit that makes me want to rob a bank. Out of money, out of potions, out of materials. Frustrated beyond belief and unwilling to endlessly grind materials, I put Monster Hunter down and picked up the sequel here before returning knowledge in hand. The villages of these games are so charming. There's all kinds of wandering visitors, rival hunters straight out of a shonen manga, a special merchant with rare items, etc. There's a quaint warmth to Kokoto that kind of dampens how miserable and poor you are. There's even a sword in the stone right out of Arthurian myth. Oh man, this sword's gonna be so sick. Put it back in, huh? Put it back in. But you're the hero. No. No matter how many friendly faces you meet, none of them are going to topple the game's worst challenges. And that's where Monster Hunter 1 turns infamous. Plesioth. Gee, I sure hope nothing bad happens to Aerith in this body of water. Did you guys know if you shoot the lake in Resident Evil 4 5 times, a treasure pops out? Yo man, what did you think of Xenogears Disc 2? Plesioth. Okay, I can't do it. Plesioth is not that bad. It sucks. It's one of the worst in the game. It is not that bad. I know fandom mythology persists. I know Plesioth has a borked hitbox, so much so that they made a joke out of it in the Stories games. But all told, like any other monster, you can run around the hitbox, you can roll through the hitbox if you just have the right timing, if you just pay enough attention. The real, true difficulty of Monster Hunter 1 is not the fight, but the constant drain on player attention as they're made to grind out every single herb, every iron ore to upgrade their armor, all the loading screens and the waiting and the clunky menu systems. If the game filters you, it's not gonna be Plesioth. It's gonna be anything else from the preceding 20 hours. It's actually impressive how many functional reskins of pre-used assets exist in the first game. I don't know how many major skeletons exist, but it's gotta be like 3 or 4, right? Dragons or dragon-like enemies are most of the boss monsters, even accounting for unique ecology, the sand-swimming Monoblos and craggy Basarios. You're still fighting the Yonkoku. It's all Yonkoku? Always has been. Then why am I dying so much? You'd think it'd give you an advantage, and yeah, a little bit, but only because you'll know how to play passive more often than not. Tail swipes come hard and fast, and many have projectiles to keep you diving or dead otherwise. The first game is incomplete solo. You get about half the experience, maybe a little more, with the rest locked behind multiplayer servers that no longer exist. Whole villages, even levels, and multiplayer features in other Monster Hunter games simply no longer exist for general consumers, and that's a reality of the video game market. Torn between art and product, video games wither through the years and even demand iteration, at least where multiplayer games are concerned. Not that your average person gives a shit about a digital leaf. I do, but look at me, man. Do I look like I can reveal even a tenth of my power level in average conversation? I live in a prison of my own making. I should have majored in Netflix and unplanned parenthood. I'm not here to dunk the first game. It's a prototype that needed to prove itself to secure the bag and expand. It's been trucking on healthily ever since. This is a story with a good ending. What's shocking is just how tightly it's tuned. They don't make the player slow and clunky for no reason, 10-ton weapons aside. It's specifically crafted to limit the player's ability to schmoove on dudes. You have time to dodge. It just happens to lean closer to frame perfect than not. They want you there, feet planted in the grass, ready to die for making a mistake. It's a type of play that's impressively frustrating to break into, but feels completely intentional. Going back with the Greatsword, what I learned from Monster Hunter DOS made the game much more playable, much more interactable. I understood what I was supposed to be doing and taking things slow. The only real trouble with MH1, compared to most of the rest of the games, is how trickling progress really is. It's probably the type of game you break into on vacation or something like that, but well, this is hardly the economy to be doing that shit. My conclusion about Monster Hunter 1 is pretty simple. It was intended to be an art game first, a fun multiplayer action game second. Playability simply is not a priority. This isn't a case of the devs are just incompetent. I have too much respect for game developers to say something like that. You don't make a sword take that long to swing and that long to recover without a reason. This is a Capcom game. You know, Capcom, the company that had the market on mechanics cornered in the arcade era. And it's straight out of their in-house design teams, not some third party. Through what's plainly visible, Monster Hunter's priorities are obvious. It's much more concerned with simulating realistic light, presenting interesting environments, and keeping the player weak than it is handing them a competent weapon, a simple combo, and a free pass to the end of the game. It's making a clear and concise statement about humankind and their place in the world. Impossibly weak alone and unprepared, a man with a weapon is merely an animal. And without a more apex predator bone structure, only weapons, armor, potions, anything they can scrounge and craft from the creatures above them and the land itself will actually ever elevate the humans of Monster Hunter above the monsters. It is therefore humankind's ability to grow, adapt, invent, discover, and persist that makes them powerful. It's a profound message that is not meaningfully captured the same way ever again. What am I doing? I don't have time for this. What the hell? I should be hunting success. I should get a YouTube sponsorship, man. Damn. What if I put the things people like into a YouTube video? Monster Hunter was an adventure for me. The kind where you chap your ass miles back, but you can't stop. They don't do medical attention for chapped asses. Yeah, they're long games, genuinely stuffed with hunts, always more gear, always another upgrade, but take a look at any comment section on any Monster Hunter video. A hunt, a weapon tutorial, whatever. People are always leaving comments like, 500 hours into Monster Hunter World here, just learned you can use stealth mechanics, just learned you can break this guy's horn, just learned you can jork your shit off silly style. It's part of the experience, learning new things and maybe never discovering everything. It took a whole game for me to get Monster Hunter at even a basic level. It took the first few hours of Monster Hunter 2, or DOS, I'm playing the original Japanese-only release, to understand what Monster Hunter was doing as a game. All through the first title, my ass got sliced and served on a platter by every given monster. It's a tough run. DOS is too, but critically it errs on the side of the player, peeling back oppressive frame data by a hair, reducing hitboxes consistently just enough that it's bare minimum casually enjoyable by your average player. I can't really quantify that well, I just know I could sit under monsters more often. Yeah, it still hates you. It wants you put squarely in your place, and it brought the whip. But offering the player even a single patch of loam lets them grow their own legend. Even if the actual in-game farm didn't exist until one of the handheld games, my original Monster Hunter play was a whole lot of running around like a dumbass, totally unable to accept that monsters had that much HP, that weapons seemingly always needed sharpening, that paintballs and other utility items were mandatory to enjoy the game, not just a fun suggestion, and that not all weapons were created equal. I couldn't find my way in. I couldn't carve my own path, man. It sucked. And it almost happened twice. Early in DOS, I fought the Bulldrome, a joke monster in later games, one that isn't even properly dignified with main target status and just occasionally pops in during more important hunts in certain entries, and almost unplugged. It was way too fast, too aggressive, it dealt too much damage, and sent me into loading screens constantly. You're laughing about this, yeah? This is funny to you, isn't it? I just came bouncing off one and fell right back in the mud. How is this fun for anyone? Then I grabbed the greatsword. I heard it was a good starter pick with a simple game plan. Run up, unsheath attack, dodge to cancel the recovery frames, resheath, repeat. Well, I can do that. I'm dumb as f***, so I did for almost half the run. One thing Monster Hunter consistently struggled with, going by modern era drop rates and old era sales, is basic onboarding. It's really hard to get people, okay, not just cave trolls, but people, excited about the iron wall you just sat them in front of, unless they feel like they have the tools to climb in or break through otherwise. It's why they spend so much time on tutorials in later games. Monster Hunter is tough, and it's easy to fall behind if your mechanics and knowledge aren't up to snuff. People sometimes bring up Dark Souls as a barometer for relative difficulty. Those games are doing different things. Monster Hunter clears souls by a good few hurdles, and it's everything to do with the main task, hunting the monsters. Dark Souls plops you in the world and asks you to reach another checkpoint, usually by running some weird emaciated giant through with a sword. You can die a lot, but you're back on your feet in seconds, and any given checkpoint is rarely more than 10 minutes away, in a game whose enemies you're often able to completely bypass. They give you healing item refills in all but 2 games, for free. Monster Hunter feels something like a single-player League of Legends match. So solo queue, 20 to 40 minutes per hunt in early games, leaning longer played alone, tracking the thing down, marking it with paint, and hacking away until you're killed. Carted, as they say, or the monster dies. If you cart 3 times, it's a mission failure. You can waste absolute piles of time just learning, especially if you don't farm and come prepared. Actually, time spent practicing isn't wasted. It usually takes at least a practice run in early titles to actually handle any given monster. It happened all the way up until World for me, and that much potential for wasted effort, especially if you blow through your precious resources and need to farm them up again, can make for some pretty epic blowouts. Just like LOL! Only in League of Legends, you'll Q5 more, tilt off the face of the planet, and wonder if you've ever been good at anything in your stupid, worthless life. In Monster Hunter, you just close the game. But not me. I'm different. I'm on the hook via Patreon goals. Please help. So for me, and anyone else who wouldn't dare waste the money they spent on this thing, it's about searching for and clinging to anything that'll take you further. So find that hilt and
Firmly grasp it!
Monster Hunter Dose starts on a jungle island, something I thought the first game needed more of. We've got to get more tropical. We've got to get more dank. It strikes similar notes. You boat over, and you're left to cut in alone. You climb with only the shearing wind in your ears and press into the island proper. Every game is like this, maybe minus the handheld ones. They revel in letting the player realize the scope of the world. All beginner missions, target practice, herbs and mushrooms. It's a tutorial, sure, but it's also core to the loop. You're meant to prepare before you hunt anything, early to end game, and it's mimetically built into the game's progression. Did you bring your herbs and pickaxes becomes, did you craft the right jewels and equip the right armor for this fight? Dose didn't invent that. MH1 wouldn't even reward you with a monster killing quest until its whole second tier of quests, and they were right to do so. Preparation, material gathering, is at least half of the early games. And I know you love doing taxes. Dose is actually fairly cruel with its economy. Money is tight, about as tight as the first game. Upgrades are expensive, like really goddamn expensive, and suck up piles of ore and earth crystals. Some items are less accessible in different seasons and plentiful in others. Instead of static, the gathering experience shifts constantly, so you're made to plan more than you'd expect to actually advance. You know what? We, as niche game enjoyers, if you're subscribed to this channel anyway, need to face our own idiosyncrasies honestly. Turns out, Nights in the Nightmare, great game, not for everyone. And you're not stupid for thinking otherwise. Necessarily. This is to say that Monster Hunter is interesting, but its artistic aspirations told through mechanics do it no favors. It's willing to make you sift through the grit to get the goal. You need to collect your herbs, good weapon maintenance, and eventually considering its elemental type against stronger monsters, knowing your weapon, keeping it sharp, eating food, often obtained mid-mission from monsters and cooked with a timing minigame, and specifically eating it to maintain maximum stamina, which is crucial to escaping, or moving, and dodging in succession. And that's not counting ammo for bowgun players, unique quest pickups, minding which part of a monster you're attacking for damage, and also better drop rates on specific boss materials if you manage to break said part, and even minding the time limit of any given quest. If those elements chafe too strongly, they're bound to shunt players and create feels bads, which is only bad for a content factory game, a framework which probably contributed to the franchise's success. It's easy to iterate on, to reuse while improving, but it's no good if players bounce. You wouldn't get someone hooked on tobacco with the fattest, foulest cigar you can find, man. You've gotta ease them in. I've mentioned this a few times over the years, but part of why I never wanted to play Monster Hunter was the central conceit: killing monsters. I think it's significantly harder to create pathos for monster battles and ethos for individual monsters than it is for human enemies.
Should have come here.
I don't want to kill animals for basically any reason. I don't want to hunt because why bother? They're animals. Killing them proves nothing and subtracts from the world. Implies I should be free to kill off life on the planet for personal satisfaction.
When in doubt, burn them out.
I have no idea how to make sense of that. I get people hunt, and even for good reason, overpopulation, etc. Sure, fine. I'm just gonna not. So Monster Hunter had no immediate in for me emotionally. Big weapon, kind of cool, but big weapon, big slow, and other game also have big weapons, so why play? Of course, this is a considered dev team and also Capcom? I let my assumptions deprive me of joy too often, man. At the very least, Monster Hunter Dose came packing content. The first generation had 2 handheld titles that mostly reused and refined elements of the first game, so 2 needed a gimmick, an advancement, something to help distinguish it from the others. So, time. Dose features 4 different seasons and 2 times of day, meaning any given map has 8 functional variations, even if they're visually identical. The island might have 4 seasons, but it's still tropical, no snow to speak of, just flowers, sun, and rain, with migrating species to boot. The items you find and the monsters you fight are particular to different seasons, meaning the game can feature a level of natural progression, handing the player a series of quests, and letting them run through before they realize they can hibernate until the season of their choosing choosing and start encountering different creatures. Hibernating costs money though, and you're already strapped, so you better get repeating those easy quests for quick cash or start selling what you don't need. Variant monsters start cropping up, something started in the handheld games with the Azure Rathalos and others, only the phenomenon is much more common. Monster sizes are displayed on kill. There's a real sense of discovery here, that you're a real explorer in this puny village. It's highly isolated and travelers are rare. You become the monster hunter much more obviously than the previous game. I will say, the biomes are varied, but very video game coded, and that's an issue that kind of persists throughout different games. You've got the tropical zone, which is great, then the desert, swamp, the snowy mountains, and the volcano, none of which really evoke a sense of wonder. You'd expect a lower range of biomes, more targeted at various parts of one kind of biome. A tropical mountain region, then the rainforest, then the shoreline, etc. Though, I get the urge to do many things to include many kinds of monsters. Even so, environments were historically low-key, and the tone only really perks up around the humans and cats you encounter, which is important to the narrative. The home, your base, your people need to be endearing, worth fighting for. Otherwise, it's just the player getting cooked in a cold game world that's completely indifferent to them. And I mean, no one wants to play real life. Even basic progress comes faster than the first. Churning through the young cuckoo was difficult, but when you've got Big Iron Slab, you can do anything! The Daimyo Hermitar was a challenge, if only because it demands players attack specific unarmored areas and pops out of the ground at your location. It's kind of like a crab monobolos. This is what I meant by monsters being the bigger threat than the player, by the way. In a game like Ninja Gaiden 2, which I'll never shut up about, Ryu may be constantly threatened by enemies, but he's hilariously overpowered compared to anything on screen, and you set the pace for most encounters. In Monster Hunter, monsters set the pace of the fight. You're always playing their game, not the other way around. At least the Cephadrome isn't as scary. It's why I don't think 1 is worth a full playthrough for most people. The game's initial quirks were peeled back even as far back as the second generation because they weren't conducive to an enjoyable run for anyone but now truly hardcore fans and old heads. The small subset you usually find in angry Reddit posts and videos asking for insert modern successful series to tank everything that suddenly worked to appease your oldest fans. Just being able to more consistently damage the guy is everything. Eventually you're made to defend the village against an incoming dragon, the Kushala Dwara. It's a unique quest type that happens a few times with different foes, requiring you not to slay, but simply repel the boss. That's right, just get out there and be off-putting. I just know you can do it, Gamer-chan! These are brilliant for obvious reasons. Learning to fight a monster was always a challenge, enough that you often had to run missions at least twice to actually complete them. Download a monster's moveset mentally, you know. But here, you're not only narratively incapable of killing this new dangerous threat, solid play, but it's building up to your eventual success in a safe, non-frustrating way. Beating it back is a matter of damage, and we have that. Let's go! These are small but meaningful changes that completely warp the experience, take it from openly adversarial to kind of enjoyable, and still earned. The Bulldrome made it clear early on. You die if you don't dodge after attacking, and while that means you're playing pretty slow to start, you've been taught mindful, intentional play before walking into a more serious wall later. And those walls have scaffolding now. It's trying, guys. It's evolving from ape to quasi-human. Monster Hunter music is kind of difficult to cram into a neat package and discuss in the music segment, but I think it's worth looking over what it does, how it does it, and why. Setting the actual soundtrack aside for the moment, the player's introduction to Monster Hunter trademark is a cinematic slow roll straight out of a National Geographic feature. Local wildlife at the watering hole before they're eventually disrupted by a predator, which evolves into a clash between monster and man. It's the game's fundamental story, across all entries, told in a handful of scenes, and it's scored to swelling orchestral music. What's notable about Monster Hunter instrumentation is its dual reliance on orchestral pieces and non-Western folk. You'd think it would rely purely on the not traditionally big band instruments. The humans live in huts or slapdash brick homes. They walk around in basically underwear. They're profoundly tribal in most of these games. And yet those visuals are occasionally scored with symphony sounds. It's wild. There's a tension in that, possibly stemming from its origin. It was conceptualized as fantasy first and became more realistic and tribal during development proper, but it's a tradition that remains throughout the series. Non-Western folk is an obvious choice. It makes sense to capture small lives lived in frontier collectives with instruments that simulate those the inhabitants might use. Of course, UGG doesn't have a berry sex. Are you kidding me, bro? But when combat starts, at least many kinds of combat, and even just the intro music across the games, we hear the grand, enveloping sounds of a full orchestra. There's some intelligence in that decision. It tends to happen when suitably important things are happening, when a gigantic monster flies into frame, or when the player beholds the full majesty of the world. That tracks. Of course, the enormity of the world can't possibly be scored like the quaint villages the humans inhabit. The world is dangerous, even alien to these people. Still hopeful, but a little bit scary. Hence, braying horns and tense strings, triumphant trumpets. It's a fascinating kind of multi-genre composition I haven't really noticed until Monster Hunter. Play goes on. You build up the village by completing requests. You establish yourself on hunts with old enemies and pink farting apes. The seasons turn and you learn the world. You upgrade your weapons to impossibly strong versions and batter down every challenger. Story isn't usually worth talking about in Monster Hunter games. Like, I'll do it, but yuck. And they don't need stories. They're there for context. For the solo players who need more than kill, craft, repeat. Monster Hunter stories are pretty commonly reducible to a few major events. Suddenly monster. Ecological problems because monster. The monster is slain. Yikes, it's actually a bigger monster! They're not particularly inspired, but that doesn't mean the shallow, paper-thin NPCs can't be endearing. I'm serious! The villages of these games tend to expand as the player completes different objectives and help the chief or elder out. You meet all kinds of strange individuals. The copyright-infringing granny, the humanoid catfish. This guy has elf ears. Monster Hunter lore is real and it can hurt you. The stories manage to succeed, flimsy or not, because of the level of investment the player puts in. You talk to these people a lot, particularly the guild liaison, the blacksmith, the chief, and the vendors, and they're all suitably weird and characteristic. If I don't get my morning quirk, I die. You find a place to belong, digitally, and that's more powerful than people give it credit for. It's a simple trick, but effective. By the end, you manage to feel compelled, meaningfully emotionally invested to drive back and slay the village's existential threats. But that's something that Monster Hunter always had, even from the beginning. When you look at the thing from a distance, it's easy to miss the heart, the endearing elements that stick with players, and character, idiosyncrasies, quirk, define the series. It's having your own little room that expands as you gain recognition, eating at the restaurant before every battle. Stats or no, that's an indicator for human happiness. Just ask Vanillaware. Helping out the mining bum by passing a pick every now and then, fishing down by the river. It's so easy to fall in love with these tiny places. How could you not? Living out a fantasy of actually mattering to a community and being rewarded for it. At its core, that's why Monster Hunter works solo. So the Monster Hunter art books are really fascinating to dig into if you get the time. I actually find them more engaging than playing a lot of the games. No offense. They're brilliant. They're very well illustrated. Look at the insane designs on offer. This crocodile whose head this is body horror. So many unused concepts, so many fantastical pieces of art. And it's something that actually was a key consideration in Gen 2. There's a small passage about how there was a deliberate attempt since Monster Hunter 1, and specifically starting in DOS, to fantasticize the world. And I'm paraphrasing here. They wanted to convey that there was more to the world to be discovered, to excite players, which is also a great justification for where the series goes from these more low-key titles into the 4th generation and on. Because boy howdy, is there a lot more to see. DOS eventually does what Monster Hunter 1 should have left available in single-player mode. It hands the player a new zone, especially created for the final mission, and lets them traverse this entirely new space, climb an enormous tower, ultimately to face down a mythical beast at the top. The Kushala Dwara and its wind-blasting wings were legendary, but it's hard not to remember a hard swap to pseudo-European fantasy and manticores perched in the sky. Huge spoiler alert, guys, look out. This ending cutscene is really gonna blow your mind and pay off all those hours across both games. Skip ahead if you need to play the first game to view 2's ending, or if you put your jeans on one arm at a time. The village chieftain travels the world and becomes the founder of a new village, which becomes the village from the original Monster Hunter.
Damn, bro, that really makes you think.
Or you'd think that, coming off the first game and watching him plunge his sword into the ground and having a village pop up around it, just like Kokoto, but the actual game text deconfirms it. And the village was never seen again.
Damn, bro, that really makes you think.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on the portable games. They complement the base titles, but tend to wind up as more complete versions of those base games in the early gens, just with significantly chunkier graphics. What do you expect? They're handheld games. They're trapped in tiny rectangles. PC gaming struggled in Japan for most of its history. Microsoft products too. And big surprise, the two major corporations that swept the market throughout most of gaming's history were Nintendo and Sony, the companies that focused on consoles and, more importantly, handhelds. It's probably a lack of space and apartment living alongside unreasonable costs, if you don't like eating ramen packets all week that is, making it unlikely for young players to have access to PCs, or at least their own gaming PCs. Consoles are cheaper, run like trash comparatively, but run consistently. And handhelds are just smaller consoles you can take anywhere. Perfect for a country with competent public transport and long commutes. Monster Hunter is the perfect game for handhelds, something you can invest in with short gathering missions or longer hunts. And it quickly broke into that market with a whole host of entries that tweaked and added to the base game of whatever generation, but didn't overstep. Occasionally you'd get a new main area and always new monsters, but you weren't getting a wholly original experience, at least in the earliest days. A lot of Western players first played Monster Hunter with Freedom Unite, widely regarded as a peak Monster Hunter experience. I picked it up myself for a short time just after bouncing off the first game and was floored by how much better it felt. It got me hyped for DOS because if this is what they were doing, things were only going to get better, I thought. Critically, the handheld games weren't directed by Kaname Fujioka, but Yasunori Ichinose, the person who would end up in charge of Monster Hunter Rise. And if that game and all its bells and whistles are any indication, you know what kind of director the guy is. He prioritized making the games easier with quality of life changes to slowly free the player up to get to the part they cared about, the action. We see it with The Farm, a portable original inclusion that allowed players to leave and fertilize things, mostly herbs, so potion stockpiling was less painful. We see it with the feline companion system of Freedom Unite, little field buds who could gather items for the player and help fight monsters. Should we even see it in the monsters? The Tigrex is a fan favorite, alongside the Nargacuga, which were both introduced in the portable titles, both highly mobile monsters that demanded much more careful play than most old ones with high speed and deep move pools. A lot of portable monsters are like that, actually, and it betrays the intentions a bit. Mapping controls to buttons out of physical necessity gave players a higher degree of control than the older titles allowed for. Players have more potions now. Players have actual feline companions to draw aggro. Why not prioritize the action? Why not make them sweat a little? At the very least, some of the most deranged, twisted, evil encounters were created in handheld entries and came back in later games. They're integral to the series as a whole and complement its vision. People use the word experimental, and even I'm tempted to, but it's more like another kind of design, another stream of Monster Hunter for a different audience. And don't say casual, you old motherfucker. You know damn well these games are free. You know goddamn. Okay, we've got the post-spay helmet, the mantle of monster slaying, and the sword of evil's bane. We gotta go kill the monsters. Do a trick. Do anything at all. YouTube, I'm gonna be real with you. Bro is not gonna make it. I'm sure some Monster Hunter players are wondering why I went with Try Here instead of 3 Ultimate, a vastly more popular representation of 3rd generation Monster Hunter, and the reason comes down to aesthetics and the lineage of the franchise. It's easy to sit back, not knowing Monster Hunter at all, and think, well, 5 main games? What could possibly change between them that's so important? And well, to be frank, the soul of Monster Hunter shifted during 3rd gen. You could point to the 2nd gen handheld games as well, with their quality of life improvements and iterative nature, a clear focus on creating many experiences rather than solidifying the core vision. And that's why Tri is important here. It's the last bastion of the old identity before Monster Hunter moved on. New Age players, I'm not trying to sound like a boomer, but New Age players don't understand how hard old games were. Look at this HP bar. Now look at this HP bar. These are not the same HP bar. You'd get stomped for making even a few mistakes in the old games against monsters that were intentionally designed to be complex and challenging, enough to last, enough to really make you feel the thing dying as you batter away at its panting, bleeding carcass. Fun topic, right? They could take hits, but not you. Modern Monster Hunter is a little different, like getting handed a large number of defense points for free. Oh, 3 Ultimate did that. Literally. That's exactly what happened, so people would play and stick with the title. There's an old Iwata Asks dev interview from years back now that focused on the series' changing priorities over time. But what's fascinating is specifically listening to the lead dev and producer discuss how the game was designed, the original game, online features and all, as a world where, quote, not everyone has to do the same thing. Each person can do his or her own thing, like fishing, I guess. Leeway was allegedly important to the team. And that's fine and good for multiplayer, but really has no meaning for single player where you're effectively thrown into the genital stretcher 9000 for 40 hours. Monster Hunter always had an interesting visual identity from the very first entry even. Sun-dappled jungle floors, thick, vision-obscuring foliage, a world that dwarfed the player, herded them into the same arc with all the other animals, just with a 10-foot sword, but also used color sparingly. Environments are washed out and pretty low contrast compared to more cartoonish franchises. Sure, green is everywhere, but it's the kind of green you expect out of a forest instead of a Monster Energy drink, for example. Cue Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. This stuff is minor to plenty of players. I used to not be able to mentally recognize stretched aspect ratios, and I'm not even kidding. Regular-ass people don't even think twice about frame rate interpolation on modern TVs. This kind of artistic comparison might seem corny, but it also reveals a sort of dissatisfaction, either on the publisher's or developer's side, with the visual direction of old Monster Hunter. Those colors, those choices meant something. Meant the game was aiming for an appropriately grounded aesthetic. And in a series where monsters walk all over you unless you're really staying active, it makes sense to keep things low-key, you know? Avoid the visual language of heroic fantasy and shonen anime. 3 Ultimate notches the contrast and saturation enough to make any backlit screen irritate the eyes, in a game that's asking for a bare minimum of 50 hours. It wants players visually enticed by the exciting and dangerous and colorful world they're walking into, and that's cool. You absolutely should color your insane time-sync franchise like a poison dart frog when it's this toxic. It's a Capcom game. I'd expect nothing but the artist's finest saturated tones for any other franchise, but it's also a sort of spiritual death, an admission that quality narrative told through visuals simply isn't enough for the series, or that the narrative needs to change for marketability. If you have no horse in the race, this all probably sounds insane, but people care about their things, so when things change in big ways, old heads notice. And it sucks because they're both right. Old era Monster Hunter is beautiful in the way that, for example, original Borderlands is beautiful. It's barren and washed out and coated with dust, but it sells the atmosphere of a weird space western planet worth discovering so much better than fireplace, green place, ice place. Whoa! But stallion rainbow! On the other hand, a world where people kill big hulking megafauna swinging their fire sword tails and blasting napalm goop or whatever with giant weapon arguably deserves a more punchy aesthetic. I can see both sides. I'm down for a little bit of anything. Monster Hunter returned to more grounded palettes in the 5th generation, so maybe getting dramatic about it doesn't really matter. Monster Hunter Tri sets the player up as Moga Village's #1 hunter, at least after you prove yourself with a set of tutorials. Nothing new, nothing particularly interesting. If anything, the actual starting zone is less characteristic than Dosa's tropical island, enough that it came back in Sunbreak, but it's important regardless. A weathered basin hewn from wave-splashed stone, a place that stood for centuries. What's unique is the freeform exploration. You don't need to sign up for a beach day, you can just go. It's amazing. Free roaming also allows for free hunting. You're able to turn specific materials found in the wilds in to advance the village, tying the village to the player in a very direct way. Like DOS, but more involved. If the player is an animal, that means they have their own ecology, in this case, being a social creature who forms bonds with others to survive collectively. It puts the symbiotic relationship of the player and the village on display. I mean, think about your house. As the village expands, as you become more renowned and achieve more, you eventually get access to a bigger space or more amenities within the house, and can only actually save in the house, at least until certain later games. Flash forward to Monster Hunter World, a game I ran without even entering my house a single time until I remembered I had one sometime during Iceborne, recorded some footage, and left. For as old and scuffed as these games appear to younger people, they were considered experiences made with genuine artistry. Not more or less than the newer titles necessarily, I just think they're worth praise. Tri deserves more praise than it's given for plenty of reasons. One of the biggest power moves they pulled, especially after coming off 2 generations of core entries with visibly matching DNA and clearly iterative portable titles, was drowning the levels with a whole new aspect of play. But further than that, only reusing a mere 3 monster designs. Everything else is new, even if it harkens to monsters of the previous gens. Gone are the Velociprey, replaced with Jaggies. Gone are the Kezu, replaced with the Giginox. And a whole swath of entry-unique creatures. It would have been important for the team to remind their audience that the art is still relevant to them, especially after the financial successes of the portable games. Monster Hunter is a whole world. No way it's worth sticking with if it's not a world players can enjoy entry over entry. It also would have been necessary given the water. If you're selling another part of the environment, you're gonna need specialized threats, but that should only serve to illustrate the title's value in the lineage. Monster Hunter was always about the monsters, but the environment was half the fun. Discovering, memorizing, the terrain was as much a part of the challenge as the enormous hitbox dispensaries one-shotting you. Actually, maybe the environment was just the fun part. Combine unrestricted urban ore runs with the farm from Gen 2 handheld games, and you're finally set up to succeed in a Monster Hunter game. I look at Tri as the beginning of a resounding paradigm shift because it didn't just play around with quality of life stuff, it owned it. It pushed for it. The game has the bones of classic Monster Hunter, even wears its skin, but it's beginning to molt. Yes, upgrades still make you poor. Brutally, depressingly poor, but the tides are turning. This is the first major console title without stick attacks, even if the trend actually started in the handhelds. Yeah, you tap buttons to swing your sword now, and that sucks for anyone invested in the artsy vibes of the original concept, forcing players to approximate the kinetic energy of a slash. But in a game this tight, a game with strict windows to dodge enemy attacks, buttons are the only realistic option. Actually, can we get a Monster Hunter 2 human-like? Can we do that? You can feel the changing winds in the game's systemic minutia. Not needing to equip the pickaxe, simply walking towards a node will show a context-sensitive pop-up, letting you tap to mine, as long as a pickaxe is in your inventory. The edges are slowly sanded down, game over game, but Tri had the greatest number of sanded edges in its time. Free gathering isn't even present in quite the same integral way in some of the later games. Tri was just built different. But what I really love is, you gotta understand, I suck ass at Monster Hunter, especially the first game, but I love the aesthetic elements because they're genuinely inspired, well integrated, pushing boundaries in the medium. While other teams were figuring out how to make the most pants action experience, including the portable team, Monster Hunter's core game said, shut up, look at the sun. Damn, you can really feel the rain, huh? FPS? Oh man, I got grass to render! And the 3rd generation was the very first and very last to include any kind of actual diving, any freeform aquatic exploration, presumably until the 6th generation with Monster Hunter Wilds. Yeah, in 4th to 5th gen, you know, the gens, your hunter can't swim. Altair couldn't swim. Altair was cringe. Aquatic gameplay truly dignifies exploration as a concept in Monster Hunter. No longer would a hunter setting foot at the edge of a lake meet with an invisible wall, or hop at nothing. players were free to engage with the environment, and it's a lot to ask of devs, making whole levels with water gameplay integration, designing a whole second style of play, a whole new hunt flow, and naturally designing encounters with water in mind. But I think that regardless of any sanded edges, Monster Hunter Tri belongs in the grand lineage of classic Monster Hunter. One, dose, and try, because it was willing to experiment with pushing the core conceit, representing nature and forcing the player into it, before things started to slide too much. Conquering not only the land, but the sea, the economy, and I know water has its haters. Sometimes you need a shark skin, that's shark with a Q, by the way, and you have to lower its health to plunge a harpoon into the thing so it doesn't just swim away, making it carvable. That's a whole bunch of swimming and a consumable hunting tool and a mechanical quirk to gather one item, folks. One item. Love Monster Hunter for real. Unfortunately, Monster Hunter is still a game of strict resource allocation and sparse gathering nodes. You're made to sink hours and hours and hours into the game to truly stock up on the necessary goods to stay competitive with progression, and some weapons flat out suck in water combat. I used a bowgun for the bulk of the run, and it happens to do okay. Can't say the same for all, but anyone coming for the first or second game should know the score. It's just another food chain to conquer, and experimentation was always part of the recipe for success, since the very beginning. Like what? You're gonna main one weapon? Dude, really? Right in front of my marriage statistics? You know, 50% of marriages end in divorce, and here you are, maining a weapon. Okay. And without water, we'd never have gotten Gobble. Look at him. Regard him. Gobble. Shaped like a friend. Water combat isn't even the bulk of the experience. It's a part of play, but doesn't dominate the runtime. The flagship monster, Lagiacrus, was designed to sell that facet of the experience, but all aquatic monsters are fought on land as well. Most of them do significantly worse on land, usually because of mobility issues, and tend to hop over after getting their ass beat out of any particular zone. So it's hard to complain about water as a concept. Just win, and you'll win harder. It's definitely not a simplification either. Monsters access different moves in the water, just like you. You'd think old fans would be happy about having a challenge. If anything, the one edge Monster Hunter Tri doesn't sand back is frame data. Not meaningfully, anyway. DOS introduced less deranged hitboxes and allowed a player to camp out under a monster's feet sometimes, or at least I experienced it that way. Something rarely allowed in the first game, forcing highly guerrilla play outside of the infinite lance locks, but Tri keeps the long-standing tradition of moves that shouldn't exist. You know the ones. The moves that the developers tacked onto, any old monster to threaten a knockout if you're caught unable to dodge. The moves that exist to cart you because you're too busy swapping through ammo varieties to digging through your inventory for potions. Case in point, this thing. And that continues through the whole franchise, don't you worry. How about the environments? Admittedly, most of the zones don't do much to stand out, but some of them are great. The sandy plains and the flooded forest in particular. While the intro level is harmless and fun to explore initially, it's fairly lifeless, not nearly as atmospheric as some of the other ones. The tundra and volcano are about what you'd expect. A lot of white and a lot of red-brown. It's also probably the most interesting volcano in the series for, having green. The desert level here is a genuinely diverse biome, seemingly shifting from regular desert to windy plateau to watering hole. It's a worthy successor to the deserts of yore that, while big, struggled to take on a personality besides hot and sand. The flooded forest is it's the best one. It's gorgeous. Selling a realistic environment with PS2 era tech might work on gaming Twitter users easy enough, but for a general audience, like a representative population, Monster Hunter probably looked bland for years, even if admittedly it was stunning. Seriously, look at one, holy shit. The flooded forest is so varied, so wet, so misty, I can feel the muggy air and precipitation pooling on my arm hairs. It's wild. And that level of atmosphere, combined with meaningful exploration, being able to dive, taking the level in from a whole new perspective, finding paths through zones via special aquatic routes, is the best expansion on traditional Monster Hunter gameplay until the 5th generation. It's so sad they removed it, rather than improving it for whole generations. It's okay to get things wrong sometimes. It shouldn't disqualify him from returning, you know? Water isn't perfect in MH3. Fine. You're gonna tell me the Switch Axe was perfect in 3? How about the Barioth? He perfect? Do you believe that sincerely? What a unique perspective you have. Monster Hunter Tri did one thing the previous games were too embarrassed to do. admit the series was unreasonably demanding with dodge windows. It's screwed up, guys. This isn't gameplay. This barely qualifies as gameplay. Old Monster Hunter is harder than almost anything in Tri, Gen 4, and Gen 5. Almost. At least played solo. And simply having time to breathe is the reason. Gen 3 introduced Cha-Cha, this guy, apparently a child of some kind who teams up with the player to save the village. He's upgradable and mildly customizable, but his purpose is soaking aggro, tanking hits for the player, also gathering passively during a hunt, even getting a free shot at healing, at sharpening, getting the chance to reload without being immediately scrutinized for your life choices is game warping, profoundly alters the series going forward because it seems so obvious. Freedom Unite started it with the felines, and Cha-Cha's just an extension of that initial concept. But what's important is that the streams crossed, that mainline Monster Hunter took a concept from the portable games. Oh my god, it's a symbiotic relationship! It's mimetic of nature! The Bulldrome wouldn't have been lethal if Cha-Cha were in dose, because the boss was trained on me every second I was on screen. I had to memorize and commit to the slash dodge routine ad nauseum. Now, gameplay can kind of flourish, become emergent, start taking on new hues it previously couldn't. Players can kind of find themselves in the world and through play. It's fun. It's interesting. It's not immediately flattening your balls. Cha-Cha may be stupid. He even says cha-ching when he finds an item. Cha-Cha is cringe. And yet, I will always kneel. I played through Tri a little differently than usual. Newcomers might not realize that armor is actually divided into classes, Blade Master and Gunner, and to wield a gun is effectively to play a different game. It's an alternative gameplay stream that changes how players engage with monster hunting. Armor isn't transferable across weapon types. If you play Gunner, you make Gunner armor, and if you want to swap, you've got to start from whatever's in your chest. Gunning is weird because it abides by all the same rules, but played at a semi-safe distance. Admittedly, the heavy bowgun, which works not unlike a sniper rifle analog, is pretty rough for a newcomer to Monster Hunter, but it's possible with diligence and with Cha-Cha's help, or multiplayer on that note. Otherwise, you end up using the light bowgun for faster sheath times to more effectively run and gun. Multiple different Monster Hunter games have unique features that you'll never see again. Monster Hunter Tri has the medium bowgun, which is, in fact, a customizable bowgun made out of different parts. Build-A-Bear workshop for psychopaths. Guns have ammo that's swappable on the fly, but require reloading. Check out this buckshot ammo. Pow! Love that shit, man, yeah! Bowguns trade sharpening in for another mechanic, so no path is really easier than the other. They come with an advantage, letting you stay out of tail swipe range, but wind affects bullets and makes shooting harder than simply pointing and clicking.
I'm gonna do it. Move your fat idiot head!
Knowing where to aim, what parts to break, what parts take more damage from different kinds of damage, including bullets, is integral to a smooth run. I know someone's out there asking, KBash, what's your favorite weapon? And well, I can't really answer that question in good faith. Nothing in MH1 worked for me, not enough to stick, and the Greatsword bought me into the franchise but didn't really last past that run. I pulled it out for a laugh in Generations Ultimate. I used the medium bowgun in Tri because it only appears in this title and I didn't want to use bowguns in general, so I killed two birds with one stone. I used the insect glaive throughout 4U, went through a series of weapons in Generations Ultimate, including the sword and shield, because sword oils really are as fun as they say. Went on a quest for enlightenment in World and ended in the sword and shield because it just works. And exclusively used the gun lance throughout Risebreak because I wouldn't just main a weapon for that move. I'd kill for it. I like all the weapons I played at different times for different reasons. I'm really interested in trying out some of the ones I missed in the upcoming Monster Hunter Wilds. Light bowgun is cool as hell. For every weapon I had a bad experience with, I have footage of someone else making it look awesome. Monster Hunter weapons function something like classes, especially in some of the experimental games, but it's healthier to just think of them as tools. It's pretty common to build up multiple different weapons nowadays, and weapons of the same kind with differing elements. And that's how Monster Hunter expects you to play, especially in 4 and on. I didn't, and I paid for it until later games. You can, and I did, whack something resistant to fire with a fire weapon and just pushed through. But why make your life harder anyway? Oh, I would never do that. I would never make my life harder on purpose. People get seriously wrapped up in the identity aspect of equipment, and I get why. Monster Hunter, for all its accoutrements of joy, from food to friends to home decoration, doesn't often allow the player to really, truly shine in any customized sense, doesn't allow players to palpably assert their identity, at least as thoroughly as I'd expect. But KBash, what about builds? Oh yeah, builds. Throughout the games, I used this online tool to help put my characters together game over game, called Buildy. Buildy's nuts. You're free to change your sex, your base clothes, facial features, sure cool. But those things are paved over by the armor you wear. There's no helmet turn-off option like in various MMOs, and your weapon is always going to be the best one you have, regardless of appearance, all the way until the latest entries, which allow players, via expansions and certain items, to transmog their own look out of collected armor. That's fantastic, and you can understand why they didn't allow it until recently. Monster Hunter, thematically, is all to do with scavenging, earning your place in the world, not worrying as much about aesthetics as actions, which is why Monster Hunter World allows players to cosplay as Dante. New DLC, Gesture, Devil May Cry dual guns. Just a small fee of $5 Canadian! So weapons are tools. Except at some point, the company realized how cool their armor sets actually look, especially paired with the appropriate weapon, and understood suddenly that branding is probably really important to new player outreach, and far more effective than slapping folks in clown suits. The clown suit is a historical and integral part of video game history, and I could not be more furious about it. Regardless, those wheels didn't really start turning until the 4th generation. Tri is still a low-key enjoyable action-adventure. Like all Monster Hunter stories, Moga Village is threatened by a huge monster and even earthquakes, until it's revealed that they're the result of another, bigger monster deep in the sea who shunted the first closer to your home. So you do what all ecologically conscious individuals do. Grab the biggest goddamn harpoon possible and put the thing down in a long-winded chase segment that leads into an enormous underwater final battle. I love that. Like I said, some folks hated the water, and the big bad is just one big water segment. Poetry. Never change, Monster Hunter. Something's gonna do the trick. Bag me all the fame and fortune I want. And it'll be the smallest thing, too. Oh, whoa, I fell down! Except, I'm not an actor, and that actually kind of hurt. And I have no dignity left. How are you gonna call yourself a YouTube support agent if your whole shtick is data-driven crap? People don't want focus-tested bullshit. They want novelty. They want something they don't even know they want yet. What the hell? No, I'm not doing a VPN sponsorship. Bite my dick! Maybe there isn't an answer. Fourth generation is fascinating coming off the older games. While a Monster Hunter 4 does exist in Japan, the most commonly played and accessible version is Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, carrying on the tradition set since the previous gen. That is, souping up an entry for mass market appeal and definitive edition prestige. Not that Monster Hunter is an inherently cynical product, I don't want to give that impression. If you've gotten this far, you know it's an aesthetic triumph as well, but in the shift from 3rd to 4th generation, its identity blurred and took some time to solidify again. The 4th generation was weird. It wasn't just a refinement and revolution of the base mechanics, it was a total dive out of home console development. Not a single entry in the 4th gen was developed for the Wii U, the PS3, nothing. Minus some overlap with the Frontier MMO sub-series because expansions were released for years. And who could forget Monster Hunter Online, the Chinese-only MMO, also released during the 4th generation, though not technically a part of it. Capcom, that's who. Games discontinued. Thankfully, we're not talking about them. It was all handheld and on 3DS to be specific. It was the first generation with true Wi-Fi capability, letting players group up and rubber band through zones. No ad hoc, no cables, you could play Monster Hunter 4 at an anime convention, and no one could stop you. 4th Gen does a lot to bring Monster Hunter to a modern gaming audience and continues the trend of streamlining player progression with quality of life improvements, but it's a deeply, deeply beloved series, especially in Japan, where adults and children alike grind through and team up with their friends. The Ultimate Editions were excuses to stuff as much Monster Hunter as possible into a cartridge, to build 10 more floors on a 10-story building. So it's important to look at least one of these super turbo editions. 4U is a whole lot of game, like 60 hours. But what's more interesting is how sore my ass is from all the padding. Seriously, guys? What's going on? None of the Monster Hunter stories, the plots that pass for stories, are particularly interesting. Setting aside that it's a Capcom game, setting aside that Monster Hunter was historically more interested in narrative told through gameplay, the stories tend to be excuses to fight increasingly powerful monsters, not unlike fighting games. Excuses to grind up avatar strength. Characters are few and routinely underdeveloped. They're cardboard cutouts, one-dimensional portraits, probably the way you think about any given commenter online. So what do you do to spice up cardboard cutouts? Right, bright neon paint. 4U hands us this band of cartoonish idiots to pal around with all throughout the game. Unlike older entries, you're treated like a team, people with defined roles, integral to your combined success, and it smooths the player so seamlessly into the setting through simple ties to these ridiculous, almost caricatures with their jargon and catchphrases and quirks. It's hard to walk away uncharmed. I know what you are. 4U is also intentionally designed to be playable. Yeah, I said it. Square up, milk drinker. I know it sounds insane, but the early Monster Hunter games are tough enough that most people aren't lasting till even the halfway point of any given title. If you roll credits on MH1, you are the strongest gamer. They're weird and unforgiving and kind of cruel, even. You're denied the ability to passively farm up potion materials, not potions, just their materials, until partway through the 2nd generation. And while Gen 2 and 3 are easier to break into than the original game by a country mile, they're still not particularly kind games. 4U is gonna get you to the finish line. It's got a hefty tutorial like any Monster Hunter game, but the monsters, the actual hunts, are all a step lower in difficulty than almost anything seen early in the previous games. It's not an exaggeration either. Velocidrome was a joke, but could still kill you. This guy's an embarrassment. Yonkaku? Yonkut who? Yonkut huh? The Cephadrome barely even dives. You ever been apologized to by a video game? Gypsaros is the best example. That thing would tear you apart in the first game, and while it was easier in later entries across the board, it felt like a mild formality in 4U. I curb stomped that guy, this creature that made me put MH1 down, reduced to a speed bump. It's incredible. Now get under the wheel. I'm using pejorative terms like ass padding, but really, I don't think making the early game easy is actually an issue. Just look at the footage. Guess how much fun I'm having in that clip? It's the first time I ever felt truly in control of progression, like I could handle anything the game threw at me, because it spent all this time, multiple quest tiers just gassing me up, letting me trounce these things, and it ramps up. Don't you worry, but it eases you into it. Look, Ma, no hemorrhoids! I agree that MH1 does brilliant things from an artistic standpoint, but to actually play for any length of time, I take 4U every time. The original Monster Hunter experience didn't really catch me, didn't really invite me in, if you will. Not that that's a problem necessarily. It just means I had to learn to take the Monster Hunter pill without a glass of water. You know, it's fine, you can do it, but kinda gotta pull up the spit, it's nasty. Games are forever torn between being looked at as art or product, and it's never going to change because the industry, the one that netted all those players in the first place with marketing campaigns and focus testing and iteration, views them primarily as product. Even people like me who posture about games as art can't escape admitting that we've bought and enjoyed slop for slop's sake before and likely will again. And I'm afraid slop works because it's designed to. Part of the aesthetic shift actually has to do with monster designs. Let's not lie, monsters were wacky from the outset. Chameleos? The Pinks? stink. Weird and wacky designs exist in even the earliest iterations of Monster Hunter, but on the whole, palettes were darker and they tended to look plausible before cool, and that's really weird for a Capcom game. I don't need to pull up Capcom's historical visuals, but I will anyway. Their games were almost always bright, bold, and cartoonish. In Darkstalkers, you can do a fetish thing. An occasional conservative sort of art direction exists in their lineup, Resident Evil and others, sure, but even in Resident Evil, characters perform movie martial arts and creature designs still pop off the screen with blood and pus. It's a company very keyed into the fact that they are making video games, always celebrating their video game lineage, always celebrating their history as a pillar of video games. How else would we get Dragon's Dogma? Monster Hunter was an outlier for much of its early life, but things changed rapidly as the series delved further into arguably more kaiju-inspired, even shonen, monster battler designs. Things like the Brachydios in 3 Ultimate with its explosive lime green goop, and the brightly colored Xenogre that harnessed lightning in Portable Third, specifically by harnessing lightning bugs. It's still ecology-friendly, but it's a little out there. By the time the 4th gen rolled around, and particularly in the handheld games, new designs were rapidly becoming as bright and saturated as the visuals. Glavenus, a T-Rex with a flaming sword tail, Astalos, a monster energy drink, Mizutsune, a softly colored, soapy dragon that attacked with bubbles.
How can anything make bubbles as big, as giant, as monstrous as
Mizutsune?
And Gammoth, literally too large to fit on screen. On one hand, what are you gonna do? The series is moving on and could use some marketable faces, so dress them up nice for the ad boards. On the other, Monster Hunter is looking a little different these days. Suddenly, it's not enough that a new monster exists. Now it's gotta have flash and charisma. It's a smart choice to take the visuals a step further alongside the new age monsters, but it's so bizarre to encounter coming from the older games. The narrative has moved on. I'm not the piss-weak ape plodding around the jungle praying the Gypsaros doesn't hang out near boars. Now I can just win, and win with style, hurling myself into the sky with my shiny new insect glaive to tear apart the latest bounty. Might have been a good time to explore how guild hunters, emboldened by their advancing technology and expanding pool of knowledge, are actually starting to threaten the ecosystem. Of course, this is a Capcom game, so that didn't happen. The monsters you battle have unique behaviors, do characteristic things across every game that make you love and despise them equally. They evoke real feelings during play, and part of that is the budget. They're clearly what the team is funneling the most time and attention into. Obviously, it's called Monster Hunter, but it's easy to make assumptions from a distance, thinking this series has no character, when it's honestly extremely endearing. It's things like monsters doing the same move 4 times consecutively. It's their enrage triggers making them unbelievably obnoxious to deal with while they rampage around the screen. It's the behaviors you see and learn to instantly react to, how they make their homes in specific areas that you come to learn over the course of many battles, what they're thinking, where they feed, even things as simple as assuming where they'll first be encountered and being right. Monster Hunter, purely by jacking up their own creatures with behaviors and patterns and a genuine eye to ecological verisimilitude, thoroughly endears players. The monsters of the real world were almost always things humans didn't immediately know or understand. Sailors described mythical sea beasts and physically marked their maps with dragons. The unknown has dominated the human psyche for most of human history, so it's fascinating to look at a game representing that kind of fear, spinning myth out of the mundane. That wasn't an emu or whatever you think you saw, it was a scaly-beaked bird dragon, and it breathes fire too. This kind of myth-making even exists in the modern world. The Wild West and the literary history of the tall tale are well chronicled, and that's the general vibe of the Monster Hunter series. Oral storytelling, sometimes from quest givers and village elders, sometimes just in mission text, realized in polygons. Monster ecology is huge for this series. Of course it is. Monsters are clearly the hardest thing to design, animate, and integrate. Each one needs to represent a challenge worth hours of investment, not just the initial 20+ minute run, but the subsequent farm, if you're into that kind of thing. So while I jerk the series off for how charismatic its creatures are, there really is no other way this series could work. Without that attention to detail, the game would be flat boring, even obnoxious. It needs to keep players in to get them invested, and so, monster ecology. Monsters inhabit various maps and don't tend to cross over unless it's contextualized per the quest. A cephadrome is only ever going to be in the desert, for example, but it's deeper than that. They also inhabit specific parts of the map. A Rathalos, aerial killing machine and apex predator that it is, tends to stick to the peaks of any given map, ignoring the lowlands, or passing over to feed. That's how it's first introduced in Monster Hunter 1, actually. It's an observable trend across all monsters. They favor specific regions, and usually for a clear design reason. Gobble loves the water. That's how it feeds, preferring any body of water to the land, but it also manages to leap out and relocate through the humid, muddy terrain because it's just wet enough to call a temporary home. Most monsters are fantasticized versions of real creatures, or combine multiple parts of real creatures into a single one. Kind of like a chimera or manticore of the Western fantasy traditions Monster Hunter originated from. Gobble is an anglerfish that also resembles a giant toad. Quechuacha is a fairly non-violent ape-like monster with flying squirrel DNA apparently, whose primary methods of attack are actually its means of survival, climbing and clinging to trees with its powerful claws, weaponized mucus from its trunk that it obviously is using to eat. It defends itself and scares off predators with its mask-like ears. Almost every monster, minus the elder dragons and the odd eyebrow raiser, is found in an environment suitable to their unique characteristics, and fundamentally, they're just animals. They don't exist to bring ruin to the world for the most part. They're living beings found in the wilderness. 4th Gen doesn't have a lot going on mechanically, at least that we haven't seen, minus a few things, and even peels things back. Water is gone from every level. Oh, my lake's gone! And while free gathering is still possible through expeditions, you're not really free to wander off without the menu, at least in 4U. To the game's credit, levels are designed around a different mechanic. Everyone complained about water, so Capcom sucks it all up with a big vacuum and gets to thinking, how can we vary the levels without altering the formula too much? So, jumping, or specifically, monster mounting. Elevation's a little weird in Monster Hunter. Old-era hitboxes were infuriating at times, just disjointed like a psychic charter bus. But the consequences of shrinking them and incorporating a lot of minor elevation is... Why would he whiff here? Is he stupid? Climbing is actually significantly faster in this game. You can physically scale things more competently, but mounting is the main thing. If you leap off any ledge, like Link basically, and land a hit on a certain part of a monster, you'll enter a mounting minigame. It's really easy. Just hold the cling when the thing's freaking the f*** out and stab it otherwise. Build the meter with consecutive stabs and you'll topple it. Love mounting, super engaging mechanic. It's simple, but gives players something to do outside of just DPSing. In multiplayer, it means even players with bad weapons can do something useful. It creates emergent play moments not previously possible. Buddy rams himself into a cliff, you scale it quickly and do a jumping attack. Play evolves from there. And it's fun to feel like you're in control of the fight, but it betrays the narrative issue. 4th Gen puts the player firmly in the driver's seat, elevates them way beyond what a hunter was previously, and it's actually fun. It's even compounded by the new weapon types, the insect glaive and charge blade. Weapons in Monster Hunter were fairly simple. Great swords, hammers, the sword and shield, none of these were particularly complicated. Even the bowguns were simple once you got the flow down. Dual blades and long swords spiced things up with stamina management for higher DPS and combo attacks respectively, and 3rd generation's switch axe was arguably more involved than any other melee weapon at the time, but the insect glaive puts them all to shame. Minus the charge blade, but we're not going to talk about it. It's a bladed stick with a kinsect. You don't level it up alone, you have to feed materials to the kinsect to greenlight an upgrade for the weapon proper, meaning you invest more into the insect glaive than any other weapon by design. Is it any surprise this weapon was originally concepted for the very first game? You're made to gather the necessary nectar in the wild, forcing the player to actually engage with the environments to level it up. A narrative win, but you're rewarded, at least in 4th Gen, with an obscenely simple and powerful beat stick that even lets you hurl yourself into the air for manual mounting. No ledges required! You know, in case you can't find one. Don't let me undersell the thing. The insect glaive has a fairly mechanical side, forcing players to mark and subsequently launch their gross beetle pal out to collect from whatever you hit, and call it back to hand the player different buffs. It's a fairly involved style of play, played optimally, but you can also just trounce most monsters by face rolling through low ranks, so it's hard to commentate meaningfully from my position. 4th gen also introduced the Charge Blade. Sword and shield for Chads! Nice buckler, fam. Check this out. By the way, Capcom told me to tell you to jump! Damn, they even extremified the sword and shield. Unbelievable. This says a lot about society. And it's not just the weapons and monsters and colors, it's the levels themselves. Take a look. The Ancestral Step features enormous climbs, dips, jumps, paths, and varied presentation. Redstone ruins dot windswept prairies. It's bizarre. The Primal Forest has flamingos, watering holes, and, oh yeah, titanic monster bones. I gotta say it like that. The Sunken Hollow is so incredibly vertical, starting from high vantage point and descending into lava. The frozen seaway ain't your tundra or snowy peak of yore. We got whirlpools, sheets of black ice, death by frostbite! Extreme! Monster Hunter always had status ailments. Poison, burning, sleep, paralysis, etc. You know, exactly what you'd expect out of nature. But 4 brought Frenzy, a disease that you're made to fend off by piling damage onto monsters, rewarding you for staying active without stopping the whole fight to make you down a nullberry. It's awesome. And if you fail, it turns off healing, so better get schwacking! The virus also contributes to the story. Monsters who survive it evolve, becoming more dangerous. A greater emphasis is placed on eye-catching visuals, clashing colors. The world is changing. Where did the game about creeping through leaf-strewn jungle floors go? Well, just like the dinosaurs, sometimes things disappear. Priorities change. I get it for you. I'm having a lot of fun slaughtering these monsters without really trying. It's so weird to experience. I can tell the nuances of the original concept are eroding, but for a massively more enjoyable run. At least the old games exist. I don't want to become a monster boomer. There's always more Monster Hunter. You can just go back if you really want, and the series is headed in a good direction anyhow. Fans restored multiplayer and try recently. Life finds a way. I've mentioned it before, but 4th gen was really when the series hit its stride in foreign markets. The game always had a dedicated fan base, and they suffered plenty, hoping for full English releases of their games. Imagine getting Monster Hunter 1, the sicko game, enjoying it, and not getting DOS. Then Tri comes out, the first actual major English console release since the sicko game, and you get Water. Awesome, right? Except everyone's whinging about it, and small problem. Games on the Nintendo Wii. So PlayStation loyalty's out the window, you just got spat on by your favorite developer. You bought those PSP games. Maybe they actually even got you into the series proper after one filtered you. And then the games get popular in the West. And they get popular because a bunch of Nintendo fans, yikes, are playing the aesthetically puerile and overall easier Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate and the Generation side series. The big names of the 4th gen, both 3DS titles that eventually landed on the Switch as well. The series is fascinating purely from a release perspective. Imagine if Persona 3 never hit the West and 4 was a Wii exclusive. It's weird. Playing through Monster Hunter is to experience a lineage at war with itself, grappling for a clear and concise vision, and a consistent market too. But that doesn't mean the series had no respect for its origins. Wow. Look at that.
Mamma mia!
Really makes you think. The original Monster Hunter, and not the NA or EU versions, okay? The original game had 4 melee weapons, only one of which could not block. Playing solo needed to be accounted for as well, and you've got no real help mid-hunt. Hence, various blocking weapons. That game was conceived of as a multiplayer action game, something you needed friends to really enjoy. That's why that one Japanese guy made Arm Joe, the Les Miserables fighting game, because he had no friends. So you know he wasn't too busy with Monster Hunter. But as the generations rolled on and quality of life improved, especially regarding online playability and single-player assistance, weapons were free to get wackier. Generation 2 got the bow, a highly mobile ranged option. The longsword, something that started as a greatsword and spun off into its own weapon type, more focused on combos. The gun lance, which jazzed up the baseline lance and included shell attacks that could damage any monster part without damage type penalty. It had jabs and smashes, slashes. And the hunting horn, once a practically dedicated multiplayer option that buffed allies with different input strings, eventually became a direct hammer competitor with more consistent DPS than its more upfront progenitor. Weapons are complex and interesting, enough that players will main a class of weapons, something I never did because I wanted to round out my experience more thoroughly. Surely a higher level player is thinking, oh no, they're so easy though. And true enough, most weapons only have a handful of combos with pretty minimal total inputs. The issue isn't as much mechanical complexity, like input complexity, as functional interaction. Monster Hunter is weird to play, especially if you've only ever played other Capcom action games. They're deliberately clunky, favoring extremely long recovery periods after any attack, unless said attack is cancelable into a dodge roll, for example. The greatsword is functionally useless in DOS, despite being a quote beginner weapon, unless you cancel the recovery frames of its unsheathed attack into a roll. It is easy, but it's the kind of basic stumbling block that will filter less interested players just looking to pick up and mash. And while the game's trended towards faster combat through the generations, the fundamental clunk has never truly vanished. Sharpening a weapon takes less time than it used to, and it's really only a benefit to these games. Some weapons were introduced in the side games and never returned, and that's the biggest tragedy. The tonfa only exists in a single title, despite how obviously cool they are. The Excel Axe was created specifically for one spin-off, but it could potentially resurface with a little mechanical tinkering just to preserve the concept. It's cool, right? I think it's cool. Look at the magnet spike and tell me people wouldn't love that. I don't even know what that is. Lethal, I guess. Capcom's mostly only focused on its historically established weapons. Maybe these others weren't a good fit, really. I didn't play those games, but it's worth noting that among mainline entries, they've never abandoned old weapons and only reconsidered them over the years, refining them with plenty of data to sample from. Only they removed sword oils, so I guess whoever's in charge of that can catch these hands. I really don't want to sit here and pretend like the Monster Hunter stories are worth a huge segment. They really aren't. Some of them don't even have stories. 4's a little different. 4 opens with beating back an elder dragon. Okay, I didn't realize we were playing like that. 4 makes this whole thing out of the squad roving the world solving problems, with the player eventually breaking into the monster hunting guild as a special operative, handling tasks that end up far too dangerous even for their elite hunters. You slash through the Everwood, a named in-universe location special to the guild, tackling the unknown. You earn the respect of everyone on screen. It's much more engrossing than the usual save the village stuff, because it feels like the story has global consequences. But every story needs a conflict, and in a world this chummy, you know it's gonna be a monster. While the series is pretty rough with representing ecological struggles meaningfully, it doesn't have to in 4. Gore Magala is a creature that's destined to appear, wreaking havoc across the land until its life eventually ends. The player, the hunter who overcomes anything thrown at them, ends up hastening that process, putting the thing down before too much damage can be inflicted on the world. You're explicitly framed like a hero. There's drama like any of the games, but instead of fighting for the sake of preserving your home turf, you're killing the big evil dragon for everyone's sake. You even have a proper arc with the guy, getting ambushed on the open seas in a dark, cramped encounter that totally kicks ass, fighting him off in the Everwood, and eventually putting him down in a final battle against his evolved form. Nice armor. What gems you got? Any abilities? No? Looking at 4th generation Monster Hunter demands a look at Generations Ultimate. 4th Gen is a lot of things. Colorful, expansive, boundary pushing, and Generations Ultimate is something like a Super Monster Hunter Turbo Edition title, a deeply celebratory experience calling back to every preceding generation, even directly including past generations. You're given a new village, Burna, and bounce between 3 other villages from previous titles. You have to understand, coming all this way from the first game and being allowed to walk back into Kokoto Village means something, even if it doesn't hit for new players.
That's so nice of them to loop the boomers in.
It isn't only villages. Characters from past games shuffle through the towns as the game progresses. You walk into old zones you already know by heart. You fight monsters from every entry, which isn't surprising on its own. I just want anyone who looks at the game as a sort of lazy cash grab to understand that it actually functions like a best of, a Monster Hunter Ouroboros that a longtime player can feel earnestly in their bones. titles. People have felt their backs deteriorate over the course of this series. Yeah, it's kinda tacky in a fan servicey way, but it meant something to play. A monument to agony.
Oh, the footage! It's actually good! Oh, yes!
Generations Ultimate isn't satisfied being a full rehash and opens up new vectors of play alongside wild new flagship monsters. It is effectively an admission that the series is moving on. A glorious, vibrant send-off game to help players relive the series highs set in a shiny new frame, and without even a portion of the struggle. Okay, I lied to a point. There's an endless debate in the community about the games becoming easier, which is functionally true. If you use the tools the game gives you, your play should be made easier generation by generation, excluding the earliest titles. I assumed Gen Alt would be baby easy mode, so I ignored the palico and carded on the first huntable monster. It flies across the screen. You need your dodge on lock. Not my proudest moment, but it's a reminder that the games are mechanically looser because of some frame data tweaks, sure, but mainly because of the generations of additions. They've always had the formula for challenge since the very first game. It's only been a matter of manipulating how the player engages with that formula. I recorded both halves of the game, but had the most fun in multiplayer. In case it wasn't made clear yet, Monster Hunter is first and foremost a multiplayer experience. You can play him solo, but the intention was always for players to team up and share the burden. It's obvious from the very first entry. Half of the game's content is locked behind multiplayer. It definitely is not fun without friends. There are villages you will never see if you fail to log in. It was a pioneer in early console internet connectivity, and it took until Freedom Unite to add felines, then Cha-Cha and Try, your sidekick character who made the game easier simply by occasionally distracting monsters, something multiplayer hunters were granted since the very beginning. Monster Hunter was always meant to be played multiplayer, so from Gen Alt on, I did what the devs wanted, and it fundamentally warped my experience with the games. The thing Poindexters get hung up on is just how much a player needed to work in the older entries. Regardless of combat difficulty, the actual means to level up gear starts with mining, and the ability to heal and make bombs, etc. starts with gathering. Those things were made easier, and not even in terms of animation time necessarily. You need fewer ores to max out a weapon nowadays. Significantly so. And while money is about the same, the cost to upgrade things has decreased, putting a pile of extra cash in the player's wallet, presumably for a second weapon or additional armor sets. There's no need to sell unused junk, including hard-earned monster carvings, because gold is so much easier to come by comparison. No need to engage in mercantile trade nearly as often. Even the argosy from Try and later games, the ship that would carry rare items, becomes less relevant as gold increases. Most of what you want comes from monsters, and they're increasingly easy to kill because you tend to have competent gear and hordes of potions. And that's not even getting into the online gifts. Like, we're gonna talk about the next? You're gonna see it in the comments a ton, and frankly, you're probably feeling it now. If you've played for any length of time, damn, KBash sucks at Monster Hunter, and yeah, I do. Everyone does, except for the most invested players, and even the cocky ones get floored eventually. Don't get me wrong, I'm not ashamed of being bad. I show my whole ass on YouTube all the time. At its core, Monster Hunter is Cocomelon for the unemployed, and I'm lucky to take a week off in a calendar year. I just don't have the time to give Monster Hunter what it needs. Hours and hours and hours. So even amidst my mountains of gold and competent gear, I put out the call for help. I hopped into my Patreon Discord, started streaming, and people showed up. And it was the best monster hunting I did. Multiplayer does something to this game, man. Generations Ultimate is deranged, by the way. A soup of old monsters, old areas, and fresh new mechanics to experience it all again, but with character. Players pick from a number of hunter styles that range from functionally normal to game warping. Picking aerial style, for example, swaps your dodge roll with a leap that'll turn into a bigger leap on contact with a monster, making it perfect for emulating the insect glaive's pole vault and letting any weapon hit high up parts with ease. All those times I couldn't even tickle the Yonkutku's beard, man, why? It turned the dual blades from a fun mashy thing into a truly acrobatic weapon. When a game is so focused on limiting player movement options, making them vulnerable to the terrifying monsters they face, even having a single limit removed feels like dropping the training weights, going Super Saiyan. It's nuts. I initially rolled with the longsword in Gen Alt because I wanted to capture the anime vibe of the game. It's just as colorful as 4U, but you're handed special mappable attacks, genuine customization. It's crazy! And what better way to dig into what's on offer than by gripping the weep stick and spitting out damage?
Yeah, baby. Oh! God!
And I quickly learned that the Valor stance, ideal for frequently sheathed weapons, longsword and greatsword, etc., turns said sheathing animation into a long-lived parry animation that puts you into an invincible dodge with the option to follow up with a powerful slash. It completely breaks the game over its knee, lets you slap down just about anything solo without breaking a sweat as long as you're sheathing properly. I've seen this stance called a more expert-focused player style, but it really isn't. Sheathing is the bare minimum you do to survive playing greatsword in the early games at all. It's a beginner move. It just takes a pinch, like the tiniest pinch of timing to get down, and it's so much fun. Aside from styles, you're handed these special moves. Several styles limit how many extra moves you can equip. Valor style longsword only gets one extra move, but hey, no problem. Sakura slash! Yeah, I can tack DPS on with a button. Sakura slash! If you want to pack special moves, you need Striker Style, which happens to pair really well with the Sword and Shield for maximum actions per minute, turning an already spammy weapon into a wildly spammy weapon. One of the most fun weapons I've ever played in a Monster Hunter game. Probably the most fun I've had in a Monster Hunter game at all, because aside from universal systemic proliferation, styles, loadouts, etc., some weapons get unique versions found only in this title. I need to highlight the Sword and Shield because once upon a time, I looked at it like a trap weapon, something designed to suck up your precious and hard-come-by ores so it could fail to hit a big monster's head and make you look like a total dumbass for playing. Someone asked me if I knew about sword oils. Cringe, I thought, like I'd want to play Monster Hunter with even more consumable items to fiddle with mid-mission. Give me back the sword oils! No! If cars ran on sword oils, they would go faster. If we cooked with sword oils, we could fly, literally. You don't understand the gravity of the situation. I walked my goofy ass out to play Sword and Shield through World and Iceborne. So, you forgot the sword oils. Generations Ultimate is insane to experience as a fairly new fan running the gauntlet. Not only does it actively derail the series' tone for the sake of putting on the biggest light show possible on 3DS hardware, it's the first to truly give up at meaningfully curbing player power and letting them just go ballistic, removing the inhibitors on every single player. Be God. Who cares anymore? I think that's what I respect the most. I can see older fans cringing at the direction, but as we know, those old games were already made. It's cool to see a different angle on Monster Hunter, something really out there. I'm already nostalgic for my time with it, and I think it's having to admit that, yeah, sometimes the original concept and tone don't need to be a monument. Ichinose and his team have been around since the early days too. And you know what? Whoa! The pull, the heart, the charm of Monster Hunter has never solely been its artistic merits. I've heard plenty of people talk about Monster Hunter now, and over half of them sound like they've got a gun to their head. What about the goofy stuff? What about the thieving felines from the very first game? What about big sloppy meals to highlight the joy of indulgence before a big hunt? What about the hunting horn and the gun lance? That is a gun lance! It was more grounded, sure, but that paint started wearing thin even in the old days because you know what? Monster Hunter is too charming to limit itself to a quiet, reflective, reserved experience. Always was. You think old Monster Hunter lobbies, you know, what the game was built for, were all solemn leaf appreciating, like bird watching communities? It was about getting slapped around with your friends until the big-ass whatever rolled over. They've only leaned into it, and it comes to a head in 4th gen with the most insane characters, the biggest dumbest meals until 5th gen, and the craziest action combat. Maybe the series does have an identity crisis, but the original fun of joining up and bapping big brutes never changed. Every weapon can be played in a traditional way or a completely non-traditional way. Ways you never imagined, ways that don't even make sense, and they're further customizable from there. Regardless of any pining for the old aesthetic, I have to make it clear. If you can get friends playing this game, it's the best Monster Hunter, full stop. You're never gonna find the perfect team of players anyway unless you coordinate on Discord or something for an A-team. Monster Hunter smartly let player idiosyncrasies not only survive, but flourish in this game. My squad and I blew through every major challenge without breaking a sweat. Sure, we died once or twice, had to run it back a handful of times, but every hunt was interesting, every challenge surmountable. Every time we ran it back, we got it right after. It's a fascinating game to experience, watching everyone else's crazy builds in action or just minding your own. Everyone clamoring for that mountaintop together.
To hold up? Oh, I'm a genius! Oh, I'm a support god!
It was suddenly obvious what Monster Hunter was doing since the very beginning. It wanted players talking and roping each other into helping fight the obscene obstacles placed before them. It emulated friends across every entry in every town. Those weren't just story NPCs, they were wells and proxies for the emotions you were supposed to be feeling when you hunted monsters, because you were always supposed to be linking up and taking things down. Kids play Monster Hunter on the schoolyard, coworkers hunt on the commute home. Monster Hunter is an institution of gaming I somehow managed to ignore my entire life. The joy of sticking with a group of friends through tougher and tougher challenges, getting your shit pushed in, taking a second to reevaluate, and heading back into the fire. I lived that. I was tripped, even flung by my allies like a shrieking pancake. I was buffed, and yeah, carried by my longtime nemesis, the hunting horn. I even raced to out-DPS the other sword oil enjoyer in our group, because what's sword oil appreciation without rivalry? I was there right where it all began, in the place furthest from the game's original vision. It wasn't about aggro or smooth edges or any of that quality of life junk. It was acting like the animal the human species truly is, acting like a social creature would, flailing around like a chimpanzee with chaos oil active. I have no conclusion about the final boss, and yeah, I know there's a super final boss in Gen Alt, but for sanity I made sure to roll credits on every game, not super credits I guess. Monster Hunter is an almost bottomless well of content. There's always something more to hunt. Yeah, finishing the game only unlocks another rank, usually stuffed with old challenges repackaged with inflated health pools, sometimes new moves and adjusted behaviors, but like I said, you can get a full enough experience just taking down what's expected of you, and preferably doing it with friends. The 4th gen, and Generations Ultimate specifically, was a wild send-off for a reason. Monster Hunter may have marooned itself on handheld for an entire portion of its history, but Capcom had big plans for the 5th generation. So much has happened in this room. I've left whole people behind. Characters, too. My nobody, the personas, my dark soul, Xbox. All of my lore conveniently contained in these Patreon goal videos, now totally indiscernible to the modern viewer. My own history piles on itself and passes like waves or sand. No boulders or trees root that firmament, only the scant echoes of a gasping legacy cast to a digital maelstrom, and utterly incomprehensible except to the only one who matters, the one who took anything away from any of it. But for what it's worth, we had fun here. Monster Hunter World. No better title in the series. Long ago, before the best-selling Capcom franchise and the Capcom Cafe Monster Hunter dishes and the consistent Western releases, Monster Hunter to the Anglo world was a game that generally scored badly, sold poorly, and was loved by a handful of sickos on forums. It was a game whose next entry, whatever that was, probably wasn't coming to the States. But something happened. The games started to sell and score well. They were recognized massively, or at least much more significantly than they were in the past, and that was mostly attributable to the PSP and 3DS titles, the handheld games, that squished those mainline console entries into little rectangles, rendered those old glorious environments as hyper-crunchy versions of their original forms. They put gameplay first because the artistry was compromised, and because the demographic demanded it. You can sell atmosphere on a handheld, but it's always going to be an uphill climb with no sound system integration, with a puny screen and strict size constraints. And you know what? I think a younger audience probably would prioritize fun over, like, getting trounced by a Plesioth because it's art. Monster Hunter World is the first time a new generation's debut released concurrently worldwide. It's a weighty concept, finally shipping the thing around the world all at once, having built up brand recognition and tightened up the experience countless times while also opening entirely new pathways in gameplay and narrative. Times changed, but not in the negative sense. It's a joy to experience and the pillar of modern Monster Hunter, even after 5th Gen's more mechanically quirky MH Rise. And surprisingly, it doesn't compromise the vision. Unless you ask the community, which like, you're dropped into the world right after the introductory cutscene. The game's determined to slap your big idiot face with the design conceit. The world matters. So you're there, following this person around, looking for the nearest settlement. Instead of bogging the player down with an hour of inane tutorials, it's got you out in the field learning about stealth mechanics, killing, and... Did you just see that shot? I'll hand one to the old heads though. World is considered, but it misses the mark in some critical places. Things like highlighting the ecology, the environment in rich new ways, while simultaneously telling a story about invading the wilderness, beating the ever-loving shit out of every major apex predator, obliterating the extant ecosystems while triumphant horns play. Jeez, dude, is the director into hunting endangered species? What the hell is this?
That's enough evidence of the dragon in the waste.
What
Let's go
the
tell the ecological research people.
I didn't download anything.
It's fun to dunk on Monster Hunter for partway abandoning its more art game sensibilities and leaning fully into the games as product space, especially with its rampant DLC. But to be fair, 4th Gen started it, and particularly in Generations Ultimate with its huge pool of downloadable quests and platinum eggs just letting the player have infinite money. DLC in World outside of the Iceborne expansion is pretty blatant. We're talking full franchise crossovers, Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, even a free Witcher crossover for some reason. Alright, because Monster Hunter. I see. You win this round, Capcom, but next time, there's gonna be hell to pay. World was contentious on release for all kinds of reasons, but the main thing is clear. People hate change, and the 5th Gen had players walking into a whole new world. The map changes had rippling effects on play. Without access to zone loading screens, players would need to be able to actually heal in real time, apparently. Didn't stop you from whooping my ass up and down the screen in 1 and 2, did it, Capcom? Healing happens on the fly now, or rather you can move a bit while chugging. It's a small and kind of obvious concession, something reserved for quick consumables only because sharpening remains largely unchanged. You can even create healing globs on a short cooldown or choose from other feline utilities. Oh boy, green pustule! World had me agape, constantly. It's an incredibly well-realized game and definitely kicked up a firestorm. Some people I know who don't even play video games played World. And it's not just the graphics, okay? It's the sheer level of environmental integration possible in regular play. Admittedly, in the upper echelons of hunting, you'll probably be tempted to ignore the environment and just shit all over whatever creature with your true razor sharp or whatever build, but man, you could trigger avalanches and mudslides in this game. It's mind-boggling, the sheer budget, the level of detail, born too late to discover the world, born just in time to appreciate a fully rendered mudslide event making a dragon look stupid. Life is good. It's a big franchise, like Capcom's second best selling franchise behind only Resident Evil and sitting significantly higher than Capcom's third best seller, Street Fighter. It's also easily Capcom's most played by sheer hour counts across all games. They ask for a lot, and players give it. Monster Hunter World, the core 5th Gen game, followed by Rise, its portable Lineage companion game, comprised the top 2 best-selling Capcom titles. Like, ever. I'm sure someone out there has an issue, even spiritually, with collecting in 5th gen Monster Hunter. You don't dig around in the muck, okay? You yank them leaves, you pluck them shrooms, and you stay running. It's amazing. Nah, bro, I ain't got time to kneel. And they're so right. It might look bad from an artistic perspective, the way you don't even need to roll for herbology, but you just know and grab. Even mix potions on the fly. Bro, come on! But it's important for a couple of reasons. Yeah, the play is smoothed out, less time spent waiting around and combining in menus, but more importantly, this kind of minutia isn't relevant to the player base anymore. It's not just the edges being sanded off. People have been Monster Hunter fans for decades now. They know about herbs. Give them the herbs! I mean, if you want to dig around for 10 years, you can play in private fan communities. I'm just saying. And the cruft is still preserved to a degree. You're still made to wait even longer than the old games, I might add, to find special items in any given node, indicating the importance of the pickup versus regular pickups and maintaining the tradition, just reallocating it where it matters. I've heard a lot of uncharitable things about the dev team and their decisions, how the series is changing direction in fundamental ways, and yeah, that can suck. It's happened to me plenty of times, and the real trick is to find your joy, but also acknowledge when things just aren't fun anymore. You don't have to be a fan of anything. You don't owe a corporation anything. So divest for your own sake if it's causing you stress, and if not, come on, let's just look at the leaves and things. Gathering has to be easier now because the actual systems proliferated massively. By the time you reach Iceborne, you'll have access to the Argosy for trade, the farm, blacksmithing, and the ability to customize your appearance, house decoration, gem melding, this weird RNG minigame, spits out consumables and craftables, the kitchen, and somehow even more. Your attention can always be diverted to some task, even if you're not hunting. And it's a lot to deal with. While you can't walk out into the wilds exactly like in Try, you can send yourself on a quick expedition for fast item collection. So let's whinge about stage design for a second. In the old days, Monster Hunter was designed for highly limited consoles and eventually crammed into handhelds. Any given map was subdivided into numbered zones, but World was designed as a true AAA gaming experience. I never minded the zone delineations. They were strategic and allowed players the chance to dive out of a hot encounter to sharpen up or heal, but you know nerds around the world would riot if the new Monster Hunter game didn't have full world congruency. The world is so incredibly depthy now. When people talk about old games being brought into whatever current generation, it's always the same BS. We need Ape Escape remastered with current gen graphics, with no mind for the artistic lineage being paved over, or if it's even appropriate for the art direction of whatever game. Monster Hunter's worlds, which were typically introduced to the masses prior to World as crunchy and simplistic, only flourish with an expanded budget. Every map is seamless. Elevation rises and falls throughout lush, fantastically realized spaces. I was still finding hidden paths deep into the run because they're so intricate. And can I take a minute to jerk it the f*** off? The jungle! Ooh, the jungle! We're talking varied biomes. We're talking fully realized spaces. We're talking simple and clean palettes. The coral place? Dude, bro, coral! You can catch a wiggle worm! Now, admittedly, you have to play in the poo-poo zone and slink through the poo-poo, but after that, you can fight in the crystal caves! Oh, dude, it's such a beautiful game, man. It did not take its visuals too far. It peeled back to a place that's both colorful and semi-believable, just old Monster Hunter told anew. These zones are so incredible to get lost in, and you can see why things have changed, just free running for a few minutes. It would be physically painful to gather things slowly in these spaces. Because the maps are so much larger, different collection nodes are more appropriately spaced out. It's not just easier to collect things per se, it's abstracting the process of extracting honey or whatever to focus on the mission design. Sure, you can wander in any time and gather at your own pace, but Monster Hunter knows that action sells. It's a game about chasing down hulking creatures in huge 3D spaces, letting more emergent play that was so popular in 4th gen and arguably 3rd flow freely across these zones. Those old games were tight experiences, but tight in all ways. You entered a zone with a monster, you knew how the fight was going down, more or less, and it had more to do with your ability to effectively dodge, make use of items, your knowledge of the monster, your skill with your weapon, etc. Fine, but once battle started, it was a big dumb asshole flailing around in one place until it left. Fun, sure, but not nearly as mind-bending, as fully opulent and story-spinning as the way encounters unfold in World. Of course, World, its expansion Iceborne, the 5th-gen side game MH Rise, and its own expansion Sunbreak all push quality of life improvements across the board, sand the thing down so it's easy to engage with, but even those kinds of things, simplified menus, expedited gathering, are minor concessions for a worldwide general audience. Monster Hunter is still mechanics. Monster Hunter still hates you. Monster Hunter is still fundamentally designed for 30 sickos. It's just creaking the door open so human beings can play. You might think World would be pathetically easy coming off the older titles, but no, it isn't. Sure, 4U implied to millions of players that Monster Hunter would be trending towards player empowerment, but World actively splits the player's lip within the first few hours. If you rush and don't intentionally upgrade your armor, you'll be pitted against an enemy that can cleanly one-shot you, even after food buffs. Monster Hunter World at no point across the mainline generation Touchstone titles ever truly bows to a mass audience. It knows what it is, what it's been about, and it will filter you if you're not strapped in, send you shrieking out the front window at Mach 12 if you're hoping for a quick casual play.
So the stream is over?
It even adds mechanics to an already solid formula, namely the Clutch Claw, a utility item that'll let you latch onto monsters, helping you traverse the world alongside them when they run, and letting you tenderize parts of their body for additional damage afterwards. The problem with the Clutch Claw, naturally, is tenderization is a debuff that wears off, meaning you're forced to tenderize whatever part every 30 to 40-ish seconds to maintain optimal damage. And if Monster Hunter Rise and its bugs are anything to go by, performing your government-mandated labor isn't particularly welcome to a community used to handling things a certain way. World is well remembered, but criticized as often, for plenty of reasons that had taken an hour to run through, but at the very least it was an experimental, interactive, and temporarily interesting inclusion. You could load up different items into the thing and fire off shots as well, like flash pods and dung bombs replacing older items. It was obviously designed to integrate the flora and fauna of the world itself into regular play, into the action framework of Monster Hunter. It's just that the debuff fading turns it into a time card you gotta punch before clocking in your damage ad nauseum. World also introduces a mantle with various utilities letting players sneak in the grass. It's tapping into stealth mechanics more directly. They can glide with the one version, albeit rarely, and even taunt monsters, letting some folks take on a sort of tank role. MH World introduces new design edges through its construction. Zones are enormous, varied, and highly vertical, meaning you're often made to run through and mentally catalog a solid number of highly complex spaces. In the past, I knew that herbs were found in Area 2 of Zone 1, or whatever. Now I need to truly master the world to make farming simple, not to mention mining. It's easy to forget, even knowing what area you need to go, how to actually get there, which vines you need to climb, which way is most efficient. Thankfully, the game retains the player-scouted base camps of the 4th generation, but again, those need to be intentionally sought after, earned. You can fast travel across zones, sure, but only once you've bothered to stake your claim or stumbled across it naturally, and it's still easy enough to warp into a zone and not know exactly which way to go at any given point when you're learning. This kind of world design lends some much-needed texture to a game trying to retain its identity in a rapidly advancing industry. Games are not viewed how they used to be. Certain things aren't as readily accepted by large audiences, and I think World does an incredible job of retaining its core vision while simplifying engagement. It's a thoroughly modern Monster Hunter. By filtering players with the Anjanath, by demanding engagement with its world, Monster Hunter retains its hardcore audience and kicks everyone else to the curb. Maybe they'll like this generation's side game. Who cares? World does a lot to situate the player in the environment, recapture that lost element from the very first title with its upfront challenge and crunchier biomes, letting players stalk prey from bushes, use the environment instead of screen transitions to safely sharpen weapons, even make use of verticality to escape danger, and pull from the land itself to demonstrate oneness with the world. When you reach a slight incline, you slide down, priming the player to jump into an aerial attack. You can swing from vines to traverse the land in ways previously unseen. It's the kind of engagement only modern tech and $1 million can greenlight, but it's half the fun of the game. Not just half the game like before. The weapons of Monster Hunter are pretty weird, huh? Enormous hammers and car-splitting swords and guns so big they fold. Weapons are part of the game's soul. Monsters are the big thing, but you need a big-ass carving knife to match. Weapons weren't super exciting in the early games. Sometimes they had interesting designs, but were pretty brutal regardless. More Mad Max than anime when you get down to it. That only changed with the inclusion of increasingly strange and colorful monsters. Suddenly, the long sword made from Rathian wings looks a lot more simplistic, set alongside anything Astalos related. Anything new to Generations, really. There was a broader push to spice up Monster Hunter designs that's clearly visible from even the early days, but specifically 3rd gen and on. The portable entries had some wild designs, especially regarding gameplay. This ape straight up Spider-Man's across the arena. It's insane, but mobility like that found in the Tigrex and this ape were only part of the puzzle. The shonenification or animeification or whatever you want to call it had lasting effects on the franchise, but it wasn't all bad for the narrative. Those 4th generations era flagships I called out were highly marketable, produced some very visually appealing gear, the stuff that got me to at least look at Monster Hunter demos on the 3DS years back. It bought people in. No way it didn't. Look at some of these. None of us will ever be that cool. But it also managed to set expectations, and that was an issue for World. World's weapons and armor were fairly controversial, widely considered bad, which, I mean, it betrays the intentions of the person saying it, right? Even I was disappointed with the muted, grimy, scaly armor, at least the early sets, because I wanted to look cool again. But it makes total sense given the refocused art direction. All of what World is doing is closer to the original vision than just about any of 4th gen and most of the side games' aesthetics. It's real. I can feel those textures. They make sense. And that's exactly the problem. Monster Hunter's lineage is a tale of two games, the art and the product. And when players are disappointed in low-key visuals, it's because they bought into the flash and flare of the product, and the art's kinda secondary. These are the kinds of aesthetic quandaries inherent to video games. I don't stand by my old Soul Calibur videos, for example, but I maintain that I prefer the lower-key combat of the early games when characters had fewer obviously magical abilities or they were contained, even goofy. Yoshimitsu, for example. When Hwang and Yunsung could just be Korean swordsmen instead of like, whatever this bullshit is. I liked when the combos were shorter and more damaging, when the game was quick and deadly and still fundamentally itself, not desperately seeking mass appeal by leaning Tekken-esque with super bars and long flashy combos and increasingly insane designs. But that's just a preference for an aesthetic, something I thought burned brighter by dimming its visual presentation, creating value in the low key by trimming the bells and whistles, using negative space to highlight the centerpiece. Monster Hunter World is torn in that sense. It's doing so much to reconnect with its roots visually while existing in a very different world with a very different fanbase. Who do you please? It's hard to pretend we're keeping things grounded when I can leap 6 feet off the ground into a massive plunging attack with my sword and shield. None of this means game good or game bad if you're not following, or like really easily made mad. It's just fun to talk about art. Should they lean harder into the anime or the realistic? Death threats in the comments, please. Monster Hunter World removes one core feature that's surprising at a glance but obvious on inspection. Monsters are displayed explicitly on the minimap, once they've been sighted, that is, and that's not even necessary to do in Rise. Traditionally, monsters were scouted by scouring the map, watching a cutscene, at least on first encounter, and slapping them with a paintball to ensure you wouldn't lose sight of them on the map. It's a whole mini-game within the hunt. Paintballs always drop off at the worst time, say right before the thing spreads its wings and f***s off to who knows where to eat or heal while you're stuck flailing around like a dumbass because you didn't mind your paint. Sad. Embarrassing. Many such cases. By 5th gen, the world is so layered and faceted, they had to just show the damn monsters. I mean, this guild has the intel. Back in the day, you could wave at the hot air balloons, your support team, and they'd reveal the monster's location on the map for a few seconds. Just saying that the world is layered isn't gonna fully convey it, but I got lost repeatedly, just trying to descend to another layer of the map where a monster was multiple times. They're complex, significantly more so than the older, flatter zones. I think the only real persistent issue with World, like it all, comes down to rushing progression, which will inevitably happen to people playing now because World was treated like a live service title in a sense. The player base came, geared up, and moved into the DLC on release, and now Capcom wants players on the DLC content. So, the Guardian Armor, a high-level set of armor built for cheap that helps you survive the early game, and something I avoided for at least half the run until it was too good to pass up. You can also build weapons like this that'll effectively carry the experience, though World's a little weird to play coming off older titles. Weapons are constantly rebalanced in this series, but were expanded in various ways and then peeled back in others to match the incredible monsters and their opulent animations, or moves, as it were. Seriously, you can feel the money lining every inch of the game world. It's a wonder to behold on modern tech. Combat takes on an interesting tone because of it. Animations are set at 60 FPS, like all of them. So everything feels slightly smoother, but slightly slower, like attacks that once displayed at 30 have been doubled in effective complexity. They're more to process. All of it is. And I think between the animations and decadent foliage, it's a game that can be hard to keep up with compared to its hyper-simplistic forebears. It also means that artistic element, gritty grounded verisimilitude, can thrive. Tangent over. Now, the consequences of rapid-fire progression. World's story involves tracking increasingly dangerous monsters to uncover the flagship monster and eventually elder dragons. Tracking is a great idea. It makes sense narratively. Shoot, it's practically the first time in the series you actually hunt anything properly. Tracking involves uncovering monster tracks, droppings, claw marks, that sort of thing. You're made to fill a bar by following the context-sensitive Fable 2 flies from location to location until you've got enough to advance the quest. This happens a bunch of times, each more annoying than the last, and technically it shouldn't be annoying. Played normally, you'd uncover these clues passively while running side quests and gathering during expeditions, while jorking your whole shit off to ray-traced foliage. You wouldn't be on a schedule and bored out of your mind streaming poo-poo collection in your Patreon Discord to a tabbed-out audience, but here we are. Scrape the poo-poo. Go on! Everyone's favorite feature newly added to World is probably the kaiju fights, or the turf wars. Basically, whenever two monsters end up in the same zone, they'll fight it out, which means piles of damage get slapped on both. Naturally, the game is balanced around it, so you're expected to lure monsters into each other, mine the world. It's incredible to watch that they even bothered to include them shows how dedicated they were to the game's success. Monster Hunter is cool, but it's historically pretty boring to watch. Just click a Monster Hunter video on YouTube and check exactly what % of it is gameplay footage. It'd be fine and all letting monsters roam from zone to zone without a leash, cool whatever, but making it potentially beneficial, texturing that very real sort of food chain scrap into the general experience takes the play to another level. Monsters always sideswiped each other in older games, but never approached this. It's important that it's beneficial as well. There were times you get flattened because two monsters decided to go ape during a regular hunt for a single head. And if you weren't packing dung bombs to drive one off, good luck, bro! One of Monster Hunter's greatest failures as a piece of art is its relative refusal to engage with a meaningful interrogation of humankind's role in the state of the world and their blatant, ruinous expansionism. Humans invade nature, upset the balance, kill for gain, and do not seek to repopulate or protect the ecosystem. On one hand, it's understandable. Per the lore, these guys are pretty ooga booga, mostly concerned with getting a hot meal and surviving joyfully. But the series does move on, showing off enormous human civilizations in gigantic cities. And to push ecology so far without a character putting their hand to chin and earnestly asking, could we be playing a part in this? At least not consistently or loudly so the whole audience can hear it, because I surely don't remember it, is kind of concerning. At the same time, it's reflective of the species, as commentary on the current state of the world. Humans absolutely do not care about the environment, at least those in power, and are in fact willing to sacrifice the future of the species for a handful of shareholders making record profits. To show that level of human arrogance so consistently works as critique, especially by Iceborne, where humans are actively following elder dragons to a new land specifically to hunt them to extinction. Unfortunately, it's also framed like a big new shiny adventure while the protagonists pester the indigenous population and relentlessly slaughter the endemic life for hella stats, bro! So any real attempt at making commentary is glazed over under 3 thick coats of stark white paint. I bring this up in the 5th gen segment because World is the real offender here. Most of the other generations, the early ones, feature extremely limited human civilizations and human impact. The guild actually regulates hunting. Even in World, your actions are justified by the plot by having the player save the continent. That said, Monster Hunter World also features a monster battling arena It's a bit sad because Monster Hunter was founded on such pure artistic intentions, going off context clues. I think the care and effort and dignity shown to the monsters is much more significant than most other games ever. Monster Hunter is in a unique position in video games to make statements about these kinds of things. And yet, from even the earliest days, we have a quote from Fujioka himself, sourced from the Monster Hunter art book, where he states, when referring to how the game is about killing monsters, quote, "We retained the basic idea of getting together with other people to take down the big baddies, but we did stray away from bringing any moral ideals into it. This is how the world of Monster Hunter gradually took shape." You know, I don't come to Capcom for quality messaging in my video games. But come on, man. Let's take a minute to talk about big stupid encounters. From the early days, Monster Hunter featured the occasional atypical battle with a creature that ideally gets handled with ballistae or cannons, a siege battle. Always something too big or too dangerous to engage with your regular weapons or too airborne to frequently hit. They're usually big endgame bosses, that kind of encounter, and they tend to suck for pretty obvious reasons. They don't really demonstrate anything about your mastery over game mechanics, and more often than not end up turning into overlong edge sessions, eking out as much pitiful damage as you can, loading the cannon, firing, and loading the cannon again. And it sucks to admit because there is artistry to these kinds of things. They illustrate pretty clearly that not all monsters are simply bappable by human beings. They make sense in universe. However, in its bid to become the prestige Monster Hunter title, World trots out more than one of these. You know, big climactic encounters with the whole squad. Matt Mercer because he's voiced by Matt Mercer and doesn't have a name. Girl, cool guy, and the player. I wish they weren't here because they're pretty universally boring, annoying, and way too long, but part of me wants to be charitable. Monster Hunter doesn't get to look like a big budget game nearly often enough, and here they are, flexing all that generations and for you money. Let them have this one. Just once. Hey Capcom, learn how to make games? We interrupt this review of the game that killed Monster Hunter with the game that killed Monster Hunter. You can't really discuss 5th gen Monster Hunter without talking about Rise. Viewed from the outside, Monster Hunter probably seems like a strange series, and way too much to get into. Do I need to play Monster Hunter 1 to understand the story? Whole generations of development, memes, jargon, piles of games, some doing completely different things. Rise is listed as a main entry on Wikipedia! And yet, when asked to return to World by Capcom in anticipation for the 6th generation's inception, players did. In droves, because that, Monster Hunter World, is the core 5th gen experience. Rise was an experiment, and it does a lot of things to raise eyebrows among Monster Hunter fans. And you, as a Monster Hunter fan, remember it's basically a spin-off or a funsies entry, not unlike Generations Ultimate. Shrug, and get back to killing. Rise is fascinating specifically for making the game easier, at least compared to most of its forebears. You can play the thing straight, start to finish, without having an overly difficult time, minus Gold Collection, but we're playing in a post-Sunbreak world, so it gives you a lot. It prioritizes faster battles, heightened mobility, complex mechanics that are not necessary for survival and merely empower the player past the base constraints of any other game, and retains most of the smooth edges from World. Minus the flawless multiplayer integration. Come on guys, what is this? It's the Monster Hunter for the guy who doesn't like Monster Hunter. No other way to put it. But that doesn't mean someone who likes Monster Hunter can't like Rise. It's still plenty to talk about and an obvious dry run for new mechanics going forward. It'll still kick your ass if you're not paying attention. Okay, this isn't Barbie's f***ing adventure, and the expansion only ratchets up the challenge. So, Rise is a Japanese aesthetic Monster Hunter title, something I'm sure Western fans have been clamoring for since the early games, and something the furious West-Taboo fandom probably couldn't tolerate because Sunbreak, the DLC, heads right back to European medieval fantasy. It's like ink-piercing tissue spreading across every visible surface. Hunt's intro with poetry, something reminiscent of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles stage introductions, striking an almost mythical note for any given encounter, even if the play doesn't necessarily match those implications. I don't know anyone hyped to fight Tobi Kadachi, but it's a cool framework. Monsters are dangerous, scarier than any real-world creature, to be clear, and for all of human history, people have mythologized about everything, really. Japan spun up tales of kami, deities that infested everything from the lofty clouds to the household kitchen. And in Monster Hunter, a series built on the enormous spines of hulking beasts, mythology is fairly sparse. usually reserved for elder dragons. Seeing relevant folklore attached to even somewhat common encounters feels appropriate, an appreciated bit of gilding on something often presented without fanfare. You're given a palico like previous games, but you're also allowed to customize your very own dog. What the dog doing? Look at this absolute monstrosity. Bros running pyramid schemes and posing as the IRS in scam emails. Jesus Christ. Palamutes are Rise's answer to World's level design. Verticality is cool. Awesome feature, guys. Huge pain in the ass when you've got a thing to do. And man, all these big open spaces? What do you want me to do, hold the run button the whole time? Palamutes blaze through the zones, letting you run at high speeds, climb walls with ease. They've even got dog drifting. Bro can even assist in combat, attack enemies. It's crazy, but I guess you expect a little lethal weapons training from the devil. The player's movement options are also massively expanded. I know, if you've never played Monster Hunter, that this isn't gonna hit. It won't matter. You won't understand. All through these games, I've been walking into walls and awkwardly half-stepping up cliffs, jumping and climbing as slowly as humanly possible because that's Monster Hunter. Pushing for realistic player integration with the world, selling the small life in a big world conceit. But in Rise, Bro, I'm sorry. I didn't realize this was Ninja Gaiden. I didn't realize I was the coolest person alive.
I like how you mined that and escaped by wall running away from him like it's Titanfall 2.
You can run up walls, run across walls, and when you run out of stamina, you can jump and shoot a wire bug to hang mid-air or catapult yourself ahead. It's crazy. This is amazing. The implications of these expanded movement options mean absolutely nothing to an inexperienced player, but totally reshape combat. You can escape dangerous situations. You can rocket out of a monster's path with a little mechanical mastery, even use wire bugs offensively to reposition. In one way, it actively undermines what Monster Hunter is, a fairly grounded experience elevated by dragons and 10-foot swords, but it also course corrects one of World's fumbles. Those screen delineations of old were useful, even a necessary part of play, forcing the game's own limitations to the advantage of the player in a highly unforgiving series. The wire bug and wall running allow players to reclaim those lost features without simply running away from monsters, allow combat to take on dynamic and flashy new hues. It's fascinating and extremely fun to play around with in a series that's persistently felt stuck in the mud, with the occasional concession in Try's swimming, 4's mounting, and 5's general restructuring. I love everything about it, and I don't know how easy it'll be to go back. And the mechanical proliferation doesn't stop there. Weapons can be slotted with bonus attacks, allowing weapons new utility options, including the Gunlance's flying ability and other specialized attacks that alter how the weapon is played in minute ways, once again allowing for player personalization in a way that older titles don't. It's extremely reminiscent of Generations Ultimate, and I think that's only a good thing for a side game. It means Monster Hunter, like as a franchise, retains its core identity across decades, but constantly expands in fun and interesting ways. It's a love letter to its own fans, even if it's not always appreciated. Now, I think mechanical proliferation can be used for evil. Give you an example of this. Cool mechanic, snaring and temporarily controlling monsters to beat the shit out of other monsters, or just running them into walls for damage. Evil mechanic, being made to collect bugs or birds or whatever the endemic life is officially called that's flitting around any given environment until you've collected enough to improve your maximum health, damage, etc. to keep you competitive with the other online players who also do this to make their characters optimal and generally immune to one-shots after food. Oh, I love doing my taxes before hunting monsters. Hell yeah, file that 1040! You've got to understand, I have about 24 clips of me whining about the local wildlife in a Monster Hunter game that I felt compelled to collect because, big surprise, dudes can still one-shot you in this game if you don't collect enough. Call that a clawback. You can circumvent this collection in a handful of ways or just play better, fair enough, but it's still cringy. There's a fantasy version of Monster Hunter where it's purely about the endemic life and collection, where you're one with the land and not part of a timed content factory loot grind, and monster hunting is reserved for boss encounters. But that game doesn't exist, so endemic life is mostly annoying. Rise is a fascinating game. It's got the modern dressing and it's still doing its own thing. But then Monster Hunter Wilds looks like it's set in an open world, or at the very least designs for exploration exploration, and Rise is just another step in that journey, exploring player options before the future is set in stone. 5th gen moved away from the more traditional crafting menus and introduced these trees that let weapons visually branch into others. That was always the case, you could split a weapon's progression partway through, but now it's displayed for ease of interaction. What's interesting is how much of the menu nonsense blends into itself, rolls over like waves into a textual slurry. The number of times I came off a hunt just staring at menus, unable to process them, was a little too high to lump solely on myself, and I usually do. The puny text and obnoxious little ingredients you need to find to make the next thing really start adding up when you've got armor to craft and weapons to build and companion armor to commission and layered armor to dabble in. A lot of things are happening all at once in modern Monster Hunter. It works narratively, humans are expanding, and their knowledge pool, their total accessible options, expand in reaction. The Argosy with its trade goods, a feature from Tri, appears even in Rise. You've got companion quests and all of this stuff. I can only describe it as stuff that you're supposed to interact with, but it boggles the mind when the original concept functioned with so little. Admittedly, the original game was barren, and even 2nd and 3rd gen lacked for meaningful side content, breaks from the main game. But there's a point where it's probably unnecessary. Rise is impressive regardless. It may be built on Switch hardware, massively limiting its visuals by comparison to World, but that doesn't matter. The believability of these environments, the sheer warmth of the jungle hangs heavy in the air. The game's an absolute joy to traverse. Even collecting endemic life turns into a sort of minigame, trying to find the most efficient route, or on earlier attempts, how to reach the biggest number in the shortest time. You end up finding paths that could only ever exist in this title. Insane vertical reaches far away from monsters that purely exist to help texture the environment. They're moving on from the contained, predictable zones of old Monster Hunter. There are actual secrets to find because of a mechanical quirk-up. I thought the base Monster Hunter Rise story was pretty basic, but I was really blown away by Sunbreak's riskier take on Monster Hunter storytelling.
I sense something odious.
You had a gas mask? You knew? A hunter always comes prepared. Yeah, that was a weird moment in the story. Oh my god, we gotta talk about rampages. I just whined about World's prestige encounters. Now imagine, if you're even capable of this kind of mental magic, a type of mission that you're forced into at semi-regular progression intervals where monsters are threatening the village and you're made to build up a bunch of defense installations, kind of like towers, and you're made to defend the village from these rampaging monsters. And they last like 10 minutes at least. Rampages blow shit, and everyone knows it. They bend the fundamental rules of monster hunting, turning the basic gameplay into honest-to-God turret segments like, oh shit, we just went AAA last game. What did we forget to include? Are you kidding me with these? Turrets? But more to the point, you don't do regular damage to monsters. You're dealing like extra dimensional damage, like damage to these things. Yeah, dude, my lance definitely hits for 2k on this kind of monster, dude. Yeah, it just doesn't feel like anything, like it was included as a sort of mini-game for a laugh that neither contributes to the legacy nor enhances the run. I have no idea how this is here. I legitimately think it only brings the game down. Guys, come on, I know the Yakuza play this game. You're telling me not one of them has a gun to your head like, and you better make it right this time or it's lights out. Not even one little Yakuza member? At least Rampage mode lets you fire nuclear arms.
Oh my god.
One thing I neglected to mention in my euphoric revelation, playing Monster Hunter as it was meant to be played, was traditional online play and the fan-base divide. Once upon a time, online play was fairly rare in North America and the community existed on forums. This led to a higher quality experience overall, with groups of interested players intentionally going out of their way to connect, improve, and advance. Things changed around the mass dissemination era when scores of new players were funneling into the online hub and queuing with randoms. Before, I played only with people I knew, but World offered me the option to put out an SOS flare and open my game up to the masses at any point. And that's the story of how Pornhub saved one of my hunts.
Oh shit!
Online play with people you know is great. You forget the losses and focus on the camaraderie, doing a fun thing with cool people. It's nice. Playing with randoms is hell, and I'm not a particularly good player, by the way. I'm making mistakes in the footage. I might have scraped by in older games, but on mental overload, I just shut my brain off and ran through. And even then, the obnoxious, insane bullshit you put up with from random people you can't meaningfully communicate with, people who feel entitled to whip out that long sword or dual blades and trip your stupid trusting ass for daring to open the floodgates, is enough to convince you to never go online again. The first time you fail a quest somewhere around 20 minutes in, more because someone else that you don't know died being stupid, or even worse, the same player dies twice and an innocent third misses a dodge on a kill move and it force fails the quest. It's enough to make you the Joker. At the same time, the massive proliferation of the online community resulted in what I can only describe as an influx of shooters. People obsessed with numbers, with clear times, with perfect builds, with tier listing weapons. It's depressing. Enough to suck the fun out of a fairly enjoyable social experience. It's not a competitive game. It is not League of Legends, but it doesn't stem from nowhere. Even I fell victim. Monster Hunter wants those fans. Of course it does. It wouldn't have a post-game G rank otherwise. It wouldn't have as much systemic minutia or as many tweakable skills, armor skills, and gems, or have ever made the games as hard as they were historically. It wants the ill. Since the beginning, weapons have had roles of sorts, mostly community-defined, because different weapons excel at different things and help meaningfully direct players during online play. A longsword, most bladed weapons on that note, should generally position near the monster's tail with the aim of slicing it off for additional boss material carving. Hammers and other blunt weapons tend to be good near the head, fishing for stun opportunities. Some just excel in the midsection or feet, sticking nearby and laying in, especially if the head or tail are covered, and you will watch players ignore those things. Things you don't even really need to be told to do because the mechanics kind of convey said roles passively. You'll be tripped, battered, some players won't even help you when they've got the chance and completely tunnel the monster. It's important to remember that it's a game. None of this stuff matters, but it still sucks the way it sucks losing a League of Legends game because someone else misplayed in a fantastically horrible way. In a sense, this was an inevitable outcome, not just the fault of new fans. Monster Hunter lays tutorials on thick, but you can't compel human behavior. And this is the human species we're talking about. In one way, human error only enhances the narrative, I guess. It's also enough to make me want to kill strangers with hammers, so I speak with a hefty amount of privilege here. I recorded more than half of my Gen 5 experience in multiplayer. I got step-by-step directions. I got my hand held through it at times, because yeah, running a game this long, hour over hour, wears on a guy. I've been having a hard time keeping up lately, just in terms of video making. Sure, life happens this past year even, and sometimes videos take a little longer to make, and I've got all these games to record. Topping that off was me, KBash, the online persona, making myself vulnerable to something I never had previously. Full disclosure, I'm sure I have some kind of social anxiety, undiagnosed but pretty noticeable. People tell me I'm anxious in person, and while I feel normal, they pick up on a vibe I don't, and it's consistent. At the doctor, at the dentist. I hate that. And I've talked about this before, mostly in the World of Warcraft video, but I never went online historically. Talking to people was actually fear-inducing. The thought of being singled out in text or voice and insulted was soul-crushing. I have no idea why. If I played Monster Hunter in the PS2 era, I would have played solo even then, too afraid to hop online with people I met over the internet. I was even too afraid to jump into the voice channels of my own Discord. My own Discord! Actively avoided regular posting even for basically years since I started it because it always felt like an unnecessary mental drain, like it was gonna tank my day somehow. And I can't explain that. It's just how I was. Over the years, I've gotten more normal about Discord, being in it so often, seeing the community I've built reflected back at me, being called in and reading through, and realizing in a very tangible way that people mostly are just fine and cool and good. I've been to the occasional convention, interacted with real people who've seen my show. I'm starting to exist in a way that I want to, and it's healing some of my anxieties. And I decided to stream some of the games to my Discord specifically to give back. Sure, I benefited, but it's more work going public than doing what comes naturally, at least with this brain I'm stuck with. This video was a year in the works, technically greenlit over a year ago, but Xeno and other Patreon poll projects got in the way. I only started recording in the summer of 2023. It's been a long year. So when I started streaming and started seeing names I've known for years popping on screen, loading into my games to help me pull through, I don't know how to properly explain that feeling to you. Playing online Monster Hunter with randoms you happen by is one kind of experience that's really fun at times and mutually beneficial. It's the heart of the game. Playing online Monster Hunter with real-life friends is how the game was intended to be played, and really sells the experience. The kind of thing you relax after work with, beer and Monster Hunter. That kind of thing. Playing Monster Hunter with real human beings that you owe your livelihood to, who are going the extra mile to physically carry you to the finish line after an absolute grinder of a calendar year is the kind of thing that makes you want to cry. Right now, talking about it. You can't bottle that feeling, watching one of those names just burst into the frame to throw down with the thing that's wrecking you. It's not how Monster Hunter is supposed to play. It's not supposed to feel like anything more than throat pain from yelling, chest soreness from laughing, and constipation from rectum clenching. It's the most fun I had playing Monster Hunter. It's some of the most memorable gaming I've done for my show. Recording games how I do, I need to pore over footage pretty relentlessly to actually remember all of what happened. It's hard to blast 3 RPGs and expect to keep up with each game's events. Things slip through. A surprising amount, actually. And Monster Hunter isn't really like that. It's a game with minimalistic plots up until the 5th gen, and it's pretty hard to forget monsters. I think the muscle memory for the young cuckoo will be with me until I'm 50. But what I took away from playing Monster Hunter was moments, little flashes of the action that stuck with me months later. I can vividly see myself charging into battle only for an ally who suddenly joined in to leap on screen with a piercing lance strike burned into my brain because it was cool. I remember being sent sailing through the air in Generations Ultimate and being battered by the hunting horn. I remember my friend barreling into the fray with an off-screen monster in Rise to pile on damage and getting saved from an inevitable cart by whoever decided to drop healing powder at that moment. I remember this insane slog I got into with a friend because my damage was trash and 3 monsters all kept collecting in the same zone and we forgot dung bombs and I kept getting knocked off the cliff. I think I almost ran out of potions and rations too, just wailing away, praying we'd actually pull it off. And we did. Or my friend did. It was incredible. I remember a lot of little things from my solo experiences, like the first encounter with various monsters, and I'll never forget that Plesiot, but it's the multiplayer that burns brightest. And there's a temptation to say, well, sure, that's because you let someone else carry the burden. And I think that's true to an extent, but it's also the point of the game, the soul of Monster Hunter. Look around at every Monster Hunter game. They hand you villages, communities, a place to belong above everything else. And you have to work your ass off to get anywhere in that ecosystem, but you can do it. With enough persistence, you fight for these people and rarely the other way around, but in the end, you eat with these characters and do your best for the sake of the village. Failure isn't death, it's just failure. You get up and move on. The village hasn't abandoned you anytime you wake up. If at any point you find yourself in a village, you should count yourself lucky. People are social animals, and even the most independent person needs connections and support. No one can do it all alone, or for themselves. It takes a village, etc., etc. Sure. If at any point you find yourself in a village that arms up to fight with you, you've made it. It doesn't matter if you're wealthy or influential or any of that shit. If people come to help you with your problems, if they're invested enough in your well-being to give you the most precious thing anyone can give another person, their time, then you've made it. No need to worry about having the best armor or the coolest weapon or even taking the right skill set and equipping the right items. Those things are material and they fade. I guess it's true what they say. The real Monster Hunter was the friends we made along the way. I'm grateful to a ton of people for a ton of reasons. None of these Patreon goal videos, Persona, Kingdom Hearts, even Drakengard in the old days, and Xeno ever would have happened if people didn't vote with their wallets and come out to support me. And because I didn't go the singular set path I had in my mind for how I wanted YouTube to be, though things have gone in strange directions, sometimes both unhappy and uncomfortable, I've ended up a much more well-rounded critic because of it. I've taken on new ideas and seen new perspectives for taking the road less traveled, as it were. An extra special shout out to Chosa, who gave me access to the games, the 5th generation. You know who you are. Thank you so much. Thank you to all my patrons who came out into the Discord to help me run through the 5th generation games and Generations Ultimate. If I listed off every single person I'm grateful to, it would take another 3 minutes, though they are shown in the footage, so thanks so much for your service. This is the final Patreon goal video, because Patreon removed the goal system. And while I have ideas for how things should go going forward, I think it's best to take 2024 as a period to recenter what I want to be doing on this platform. But I would never have gotten that opportunity if it weren't for people like you. Just chalk up creative growth to another thing to be grateful for. That said, I'll be back soon enough with more. Roll the credits. Hey, it's KBash. Huge thanks goes out to my $4 patrons. Check them out. Beautiful. And double special thanks goes to my extra generous patrons who are Adam Welch, Acropolin, All the Singularities, Alpha 42, Andrew Redacted, Arch, Arshwasser, Azura, Axin8, Bear Skeleton, Basement Dweller, Bosch 7, Ben M, Beguile, Big Papa Sprung, Bing Bing Doodoo Oingo Boingo Time, Blake Against the Machine, Wargle Hargle, Blossom Dante, Bohop, Boom Dead, PH Operator, Born in Shadow, Brandon S, Brandon Hesse, British Gooch, Cal, Cakesar, Can I Cuss on Here? C-Dub, Caesar T, Chiefy Boy, Hero, Cordit, Chris Bromo, Cody Golden, Comfy Moogle, Couch Moba, Crashgers, Crater, Chrono 19D, CW Glassworks, Cynical, Denny Pango, Dakota Storm Jones, Steak, Swag, David Castillo, Dara, Decode, Deadward, Dead, Dennis Amaya, The Strega, Diablo, Dingus Bat, Doodle Flu, Doug Prince, DJ, Professor K, Dr. Cullen PhD, The Protagonist, Dylan Coffee, 8-Bit Funk, Elias, Elpio, Elsa, Emperor Pickle, Empty Tension, Eric Monticello, Aesthetico, Everstone Isle, Gnar, Fail Knight, Forte Noir, Fupa Saiyan, Frankenstein, Frisky Nippler, Frog Vorbis, Gato Nero, Gigglebite, Glyphseeker, Ninecat, Gobo Bobo, Goose 6112, Gray, The Darkest Black, Corey, Gucci Plank, Asi Ibrahim Tanirga, Hatsune Miku's Crack House, Heeman, Game & Station, Hermit J, Hexmax, Honeymutt, Horn Tiger, How do you know? Huey. I just took 7 grams of magic mushrooms and now I'm lost in the woods. I'm supporting KBash just because I wanted to make this part of the video longer. Inferno galore. Ingenious Cloud. IOBG. I punched a sandwich. Irrational. Irradiated cherries. Dice Kyle. It's not bad. It's time to sue. It's not good. Ivy Ruth Langley. Jack Hydra. Jacob. James. Jason Lasky. Jaden. Jay Drito. JL Savarus. J Deus. JK Hedgehog. John Bo the Joker. Jordan Joyner. Jorzy Burden. Juicy Frost. Jules DLC. Julian My Julian. June. Kaizetta Slow. KBash's best K. Keegan Too Cool. Keith the Thief. Kata Snack. King Kuma. Keej. Kenite Pike. Clock. K-Noe. Cone 2020. Crated. Crazy Dark Chocolate. Kumi. Heist. Kyle. KZ Excellent. Lady Dentalian. Lady Weed. Latrix. Laundry Mom. Lego Sid. Lethal Nibbles. Linkle. Little Big Trouble. Loathsome Dung Eater. Low Fat Mogert. Lucas Boy. Lucky McSmucky. Mac James. Lunatic. Loopin' the Turd. Magic Meows. Magical Madman. Mama Rollin. Manapool. Mara Ganger. Marcules. Marsmugio. Maximilian Wolfgang Niver. Meeple Puppet. Metal Gear Gaseous. Michelle Citrano. Mike DeVere. Milky Moo Official. Mikusagi. Moa. Bobby Dobby. Big Titty Gok. GF Cooley. Monochrome Only. Morgana Black. Modi. Mr. Dodongo. Mr. Whiskey 282. Mr. Yeety Dabface McYoink Bomb. Nyrenew. Nito Torpedo. Nico Puzzle Rat. Nifty Rex. Norian Daridius. Not Nobel. Nuggy. Old Burgle. Old Man Cranberry. Omega Fighter. Omni Nerd Zero. Only LK. The Plant. PBK. Pandemic Cowboy. Pelagic Undulation. PK Gaming. E-Mike. Popular Hitman. Potato Gaming HD. Prismatic Dan. Pringle Prongle. Pringle Prongle. Probably not Grady. Fractal and Pals. Project Darklight. Punch Fighter Champion. Quasar McDougal. Quillworth. Quinn. Radpunk. Raging Ataraxia. Reggie Rodriguez. Renteca Bond. Ricochet Frame. Relay. Roylondo. RP Gamer. Ryan Machel. Ryan Maury Brooks. Saigon Man. Siren Smells Good. Salsa. Salty Smasher. Scribe Slendy. Say. Sakai no Award. Saphirium. Sexy Bionicle GF. Shot. Shinigami. Shintendo. Shut up, Wesley. Silver Bear 909. Sin. God! Sir Doodles-a-lot. Sir Slurps-a-lot. Sleepy Wabbit. Snart. Small Turtle House. So Zeta Dad. Sockum Bopper. Suckdolager. Space Lizard. Squidged. Squishword. Star Night Sky. Storm Strider and the House of Storm. Streffin Battles. Super Dingus. Super Sandwich Guy. Taya Toxin. George Chubbington. Terrence Swift. The Big Bubby. The Clown Prince of Cringe. The Digital Dutchman. The Good Lord has blessed me. Hallelujah! The Green Loki. The Crispy Boy. The Peacemaker Pyro. The Salt Knight. The Nomad. The Real McCoy. Big Dick Mystic, Thresh, Rips Heart, Tiggles McGuffin, Tim Lobster, Timid the Writer, Tony Jones, The Legend, Total Play, Travis Edwards, Twiddle, Chungus, Ty Guy 9001, Type A Grapefruit, Vid, Vacant Plaza, Valenris, Venom, Vice Pop, Vic, Joaquin, Get Right in My Bag, Waposa, We Are So KBash, Weed Trash, Waylon, Where Am I? Help? Widgie, Winter Solstice, Win TV, Renchim, Zanny Tanner, Shravius, Yero 12, Yashichi, Yay Kundo, Your Mom, Winky Zachary Lives, Zachary Zanasso, Zane the Impure, Zane the Pure, Zed Slayer Gamer, Zero Zalazar, Sylvan Ray, Zenova, Cyberbunk. If you'd like to help support the show, unlock new long-form projects, and help me keep improving, check out my Patreon. We got lots more videos in store. Stay tuned for more. KBash out. I have to show off some of the community art from the streams, man. The gameplay feels simply extraordinary. Why? Oh no, Femboy KBash is real. The storytelling is intrinsic to the gameplay. Just because my whole shtick includes voice clips.
I lived in Korea.
No. This picture has my number so bad you'd swear they doxed me. I can't show off the word I'm saying without getting in trouble with YouTube, but suffice to say it's a no-no word. No, this one's perfect. This is the Monster Hunter experience. When does it stop? When does it stop? Stop! Stop!